a proposal to protect the biological diversity and to build a shared future for all life on Earth.
在这里，有一只胸怀世界的小鸟。每年秋季，小小的北京雨燕开始迁飞，一路穿越37个国家，最终抵达南非高原。
For them, the Earth is a whole. The countries they fly across are all homes. No matter they are big or small, powerful or weak, rich or poor. Humans are to coexist harmoniously with nature and all things on Earth. China will work together with the world to protect this planet we call home.
在这里，我们的祖先祭祀天地，祈愿风调雨顺，谷物丰收。
The elegant Chinese characters were inspired by the beauty of life in nature. The classical book of songs expresses the sincere feelings through describing various beings in the world. The Chinese civilization has always respected and loved nature and valued the harmony between man and nature. Giant pandas are a species from 8 million years ago. China has set up the Giant Panda National Park that covers 27,000 square kilometers of mountain forest. Nearly 2,000 wild pandas are living freely and producing here. Setting eco-red line, building national parks, establishing nature reserves, and keeping a distance from wild species reflect people's willingness to restrain their own behavior and to give way to wild species. The germplasm resource banks and gene banks around the country hold the survival code of millions of species, protecting the valuable assets for humankind. Forest conservation and the holistic conservation and restoration of mountain, river, forest, farmland, lake, grassland, and desert ecosystems are bringing back lucid waters, lush mountains, blue sky, and white clouds.
像保护眼睛一样保护自然和生态环境。这个理念在中国深入人心。在这里，曾经灭绝的麋鹿不但恢复了种群数量，还被成批野化放归大自然。
Thanks to the unremitting efforts by China, many extinct or endangered wild species are regaining confidence and dignity. The elevation of Yunnan varies from 70 meters to 6,700 meters. It's a kingdom of animals and plants. people's efforts to protect biological diversity is speeding up at the moment. China is taking actions to accomplish the mission. Human beings have put forward a proposal to protect the biological diversity and to build a shared future for all life on Earth.
在这里，有一只胸怀世界的小鸟。每年秋季，小小的北京雨燕开始迁飞，一路穿越37个国家，最终抵达南非高原。
For them, the Earth is a whole. The countries they fly across are all homes. No matter they are big or small, powerful or weak, rich or poor. Humans are to coexist harmoniously with nature and all things on Earth. China will work together with the world to protect this planet we call home.
尊敬的各位部长
Distinguished ministers, dear delegates, welcome back to the afternoon plenary of the high-level segment. We shall continue with the list of speakers in the order we left from our previous session. There were some serious delays in the morning session. We still have a very long list of speakers. In view of that, I will do my best not to amend or revise this list and will be stricter with time management. The Secretariat has prepared a bell which would be sounded at the end of 3 minutes. If you exceed your time limit by 1 minute, you will hear the bell again. If after these 2 reminders you have not wrapped up, then your microphone will be at risk of being cut off. The purpose, of course, is to have better time management. I thank you in advance for your understanding and for your cooperation. We do our best to give the floor to all speakers who have inscribed. Before I open the floor to hear more national statements, it's my pleasure, as per our practice, to have 3 keynote speakers with us today to open the session. I'd like to invite our first speaker, Mr. Peter Thompson, UN Secretary General's Special Envoy for the Ocean, to address the room.
I live in fear of the bell, so I better be quick. Look, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I have the honor of addressing you today in my capacity as the UN Secretary General's Special Envoy for the ocean within which 80% of the biodiversity of planet Earth is contained, but also speak as a former president of the UN General Assembly and as the citizen of a small island developing country. Most importantly, I stand here, or I sit here actually, as the grandfather of 4 young girls, the youngest of whom is not yet 3. Along with children throughout the 7 continents and the ocean's scattered islands, she will inherit 21st century conditions shaped by the outcomes of this conference. My youngest granddaughter will be 80 when dawn rises on the 22nd century. Will she have spent her life within an environment flourishing in the embrace of bounteous nature, or is her generation condemned to a bitter struggle in dark dystopian days? That, ladies and gentlemen, is the question. It is the question that is central to our deliberations here in Montreal. And either we embrace intergenerational justice or we miss the essential point of being here at all. These words are not hyperbole. They're the honest reportage of current realities, informed by IPCC, IPBES, and the WMO. The United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has already declared a red alert for humanity, saying that we've been making war on nature and that we're on track towards an unlivable world, that's a 3 degrees world, and that we must make peace with nature without delay. If the outcomes of this biodiversity conference produce the universal transformational targets required to stop the predicted wave of near-term mass extinctions on planet Earth, we will have put the sword to that dystopian future that so many people predict. Meet the targets set by the Paris Climate Agreement, the Sustainable Development Agenda, and the UN Biodiversity Conference, and today's leaders will have fulfilled the tasks demanded of them. And our grandchildren will have the environmental security we wish for them. Ladies and gentlemen, for the global biodiversity framework to be true to its purpose, the ocean within it must be commensurate to its planetary role. The ocean's place within it must be commensurate to its planetary role. From the awe-inspiring creatures of the deep ocean to the struggles of life in the polar regions, from the tiny photosynthetic organisms producing half the planet's oxygen to the teeming nutrition existing along our shorelines, that role is paramount, and we turn our backs on the ocean at our peril. Therefore, I say again, the ocean is home to some 80% of the planet's biodiversity, and pure logic demands that its place within the global biodiversity framework be fortified. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in 1987 in Montreal, we finalized the global agreement to protect the stratospheric ozone layer by phasing out ozone-depleting substances. Unchecked, without the protective shield of that ozone layer, we would have been subjected to life-threatening levels of ultraviolet radiation. Universally ratified, the Montreal Protocol stands today as a shining example of multilateral cooperation, delivering on point. When we depart Montreal this weekend, we must do so in the knowledge that we have again exercised the very best of multilateralism, and that as a result of our coming together in consensus, the remaining biodiversity of this planet has the reprieve it needs to survive, and that intergenerational justice has indeed been seen to have been done. I thank you for your attention.
I thank you, Mr. Thompson, for your message. I now invite our second keynote speaker to take the floor. Mr. Colin Barath Reddy, Interim Director of CBD Alliance. Please, the floor is yours.
President, I speak on behalf of the CBD Alliance. We look to the commitment of you, excellencies and ministers, to elevate human rights to the level they deserve, and the relevant goals and targets, and with relevant indicators that are firmly based in social science and gender differentiated. The current Section B bis can at most be complementary to this. We particularly insist on guaranteeing protection of human rights and the rights of indigenous people, women, local communities in Target 3, and a specific reference to respect for the territories and customary lands, and we need to have clear headline indicators on this. The global biodiversity framework has to be based on the principles of equity and common but differentiated responsibilities. High-income nations bear the overwhelming responsibility for global ecological breakdown and need to urgently reduce their overexploitation of resource use to fair and sustainable levels. Excellencies, we strongly support the new EU regulation on deforestation-free commodities in this respect. We call for its expansion to cover human rights, other ecosystems, and the financial sector, and we call on other countries with a significant ecological footprint to adopt similar legally binding regulations. Developed countries owe an ecological debt to the rest of the world and must provide the necessary finance to developing countries in line with their legal obligations under the Convention on Biological Diversity. We firmly reject the notion of all sources of finance, as this might include very harmful sources of funding like carbon offsets, biodiversity offsets, or mass tourism. We cannot end up in a situation where 30% of the planet is being protected through financial resources earned through destroying 70% of the planet. We reiterate our opposition to the use of terms like nature-based solution and nature positive. These are merely slogans which replace biodiversity with meaningless, unmeasurable terms and invite endless greenwashing and false solutions rather than meaningful science-based action to protect biodiversity. It should have no place in global biodiversity framework. The three objectives of the convention need to be implemented equitably and in a balanced manner, as none can be achieved without the other. In this slide, we reiterate our call for an equitable, gender, just, and effective benefit sharing mechanism for digital sequence information. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Reddy, for your statement. I now invite our third keynote speaker of the session, Mr. Marco Lambertini, Director General, WWF International. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President, and Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delivering this statement on behalf of 6 international environmental organizations followed by millions of people: BirdLife International, Campaigns of Nature, Conservation International, the Nature Conservancy, Wildlife Conservation Society, and the Worldwide Fund for Nature. Let us firstly underscore the tragedy and the dangerous impact of nature loss, as dangerous as climate change, and in fact, deeply interconnected with it. There is no room for complacency. There is no time for delays. Nature loss today is no longer an isolated ecological issue, but is increasingly a security issue for humanity and a justice issue, an intergenerational justice issue at the same time. Whether it is to combat climate change and keep the 1.5 degrees alive, to prevent the next pandemic of zoonotic origin, to secure food, water, livelihoods, and human well-being, and deliver the right to a healthy environment to all, it is blatantly clear that we need to halt and reverse nature loss by 2030 for a nature-positive world, so we have more nature at the end of the decade, not less. This is the global goal that the GBF should codify in its mission. This is equivalent for nature of the 1.5 degrees for climate, and give governments, businesses, investors, consumers, IPLCs, and the whole of society a common goal towards which they can all contribute. This will require ministers to resolve existing differences and land an ambitious, human rights-based and transformational global biodiversity framework with 5 elements. A clear and ambitious mission to halt and reverse nature loss by 2030 and build a nature-positive world. This is going to be the new North Star, Southern Cross for all of us to deliver a sustainable future. Second, an inclusive 30 by 30 target. Science is demanding that. Third, firm action to transform drivers of nature loss, critical to sustainably manage the 70% remaining. And fourth, adequate resource mobilization and a clear ratcheting and implementation mechanism. And fifth, a commitment to nature-based solutions with the right safeguards. A weak global biodiversity framework, it's not acceptable. It will perpetuate a business-as-usual nature-negative economy, allowing for more loss of nature and socioeconomic impact and inequality. A strong GBF is essential for unlocking more funding, and unlocking funding is essential for a strong GBF. The two needs to go hand in hand. We need more funding from more sources. We need more funds going to developing countries, which must be more accessible and more quickly in order to close the financing gap for biodiversity. We welcome constructive proposals from parties in this direction that we know are under discussion, and we hope to see soon convergence and agreement. Mr. President, I conclude by urging the world leaders not to miss this opportunity to choose the right side of history by adopting a clear plan to halt and reverse nature loss by 2030 and build a nature-positive world. It's possible, and more importantly, is necessary. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lambertini, for your message. This concludes our keynote speeches of the session, and I'd like to once again thank Mr. Thompson, Mr. Reddy, and Mr. Lambertini for their remarks and for their support. We shall now continue with the list of speakers inherited from this morning in the order we left from our previous session. We continue to give the floor to dear ministers. Again, I appeal to your cooperation to limit your statements to no more than 3 minutes. The first speaker is the Deputy Minister of the Environment of Liberia, Randall M. Dobayo II, to be followed by Ethiopia. You have the floor.
The government and people of Canada, the government of the People's Republic of China, Madam Executive Secretary of the Convention on Biological Diversity, distinguished representative of governments and people of the 196 parties to this Convention on Biodiversity, ladies and gentlemen, I bring you greetings from the President of the Republic of Liberia, President George Weah, through the Executive Director of the Environmental Protection Agency, on this occasion of hosting the COP-15 of this significant convention. Mr. Chair, Liberia's biodiversity resources and its ecosystems are critical to the social and economic survival of the people of Liberia. Importantly, we are home to the largest remaining portion of the Upper Guinea rainforest in West Africa, for which Liberia has committed to protecting at least 30% on unwavering conservation approaches. As Liberia prioritizes the conservation and sustainable use of these natural habitats, which our people depend on for their livelihood, climate regulation, and protection and prevention of diseases, we hope the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework also includes targets that demand concrete global actions toward mitigating the negative impact on biodiversity. A new ambitious strategic plan matched with the required financial resources is needed to address the triple crisis of biodiversity loss, climate change, and pollution. This ambitious plan will enable us to reset our relationship and make peace with nature. Your Excellency, having a realistic strategy to raise the needed resources is a priority for Liberia. This is why Liberia strongly supports a realistic resource mobilization target as contained in Target 19.1, particularly articulated by the African Group of Negotiators and like-minded African countries. Additionally, Liberia supports establishing a biodiversity trust fund dedicated exclusively to mobilizing resources for implementing the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. In conclusion, Mr. Chairman, we urge everyone to be reminded of our role as caretakers of biodiversity resources and ecosystems that we have inherited, but with an obligation to protect, conserve, and sustainably manage. Therefore, our collective obligation is to ensure that these resources and ecosystems remain in good health and strive for the next generation. That is the obligation we have, and that is the duty we must honor. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister, for your statement. Now I give the floor to the State Minister for Natural Resources of Ethiopia, Professor Iyasu Elias. He will be followed by Cuba. I give you the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Please allow me to express my gratitude to His Excellency Mr. Han Grunke, Minister of Ecology and Environment of China, for leading this important COP, and equally to the Government of Canada for the successful co-hosting of this COP. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, everyone agrees that biodiversity is the basis of all socioeconomic development, particularly for less developed countries. Ethiopia is one of the mega diverse countries for its rich biological diversity. However, these resources are sternly vanishing because of droughts and floods and related to climate change effects. For example, in 2022 alone, Ethiopia lost millions of indigenous livestock population in the pastoral lowlands that are hard hit by the recurrent droughts. Such calamities will get even worsened if appropriate measures and timely actions are not taken with the full commitment of the government and the international community. In this regard, the post-2020 GBF that's currently being negotiated holds a great opportunity to halt biodiversity loss, and we look forward to its full materialization. Ethiopia has formulated climate-resilient green economy strategy that aims at sustaining biodiversity resources through afforestation and integrated watershed management for landscape restoration. For example, the first phase of the Green Legacy Initiative has achieved the planting of 25 billion tree seedlings over the past 4 years. And with 80% of survival rate, these trees would contribute substantially in sequestering greenhouse gas emissions from the industrial countries. This is a clear manifestation of Ethiopia's government and people's commitment for global environmental sustainability and biodiversity conservation and climate change adaptation and mitigation. Mr. President, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the adoption of the current GBF in COP-15 is crucially important to strengthen such national and regional level efforts to deal with ecosystem degradation and biodiversity loss. As it's evident from the ongoing negotiations, the post-2020 GBF has global ambitions as manifested by the proposed targets 1, 2, 3, but the materialization of this requires more realistic actions and less words and fruitless negotiations and motions. We therefore hope that the main outcomes of COP-15 will be a package of decisions on the proposed targets, particularly Target 3, 30 by 30 DSI, and effective resource mobilization and financing mechanisms. In addition, we do hope that the benefit sharing from genetic resources will be based on principles of respecting the customs and practices of indigenous peoples and local communities. Mr. President, I can assure you that Ethiopian government is committed for the successful implementation of the GBF, and we expect similar commitments from concerned parties. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Minister, for your statement. I now give the floor to Deputy Minister of Science, Technology and Environment of Cuba, Ms. Adianes Tobada Zamora, who will be followed by Luxembourg. Minister, you have the floor.
Señor Presidente.
President, distinguished ministers, authorities, delegates, I would like to say on behalf of the Government of Cuba that we would like to thank the Ministry of Ecology, the People's Republic of China, for organizing this event. We express our satisfaction for the hospitality offered by the people of Montreal. President, actions to halt and reverse the loss of biodiversity and to sustainably utilize it are complex issues for developing nations, which are forced to use their limited financial and technological resources to contend with the multi-dimensional crisis which was exacerbated by the blow of the COVID-19 pandemic. Our optimism has led us to work in solidarity on an ongoing basis at global level, as the majority of these environmental challenges we face do not stop at borders, although, first and foremost, they do need to be combated nationally, bearing in mind the circumstances and particular characteristics of each country. Cuba expresses its backing for a global strategic framework for biodiversity post-2020, which reflects in a balanced fashion the objectives of the Convention. Its goals need to be comprehensive, enshrining specific commitments, and they must not impede, and they must not be made conditional upon national implementation. The goal of financing is critical for legitimacy. The arguments are well known: historic justice and environmental justice, and common but differentiated responsibilities, inter alia. As well as these commitments, without these commitments, there will without doubt be the worst possible consequences for global biodiversity. Such a challenge, upon which the future of this generation and the future generations depend, needs to be faced with solid political will. Cuba has in its constitution the right to the enjoyment of a healthy and balanced environment, and has a national economic development and social program running to 2030, establishing one of its priorities as addressing biodiversity loss, safeguarding coasts, land, coral reefs, swamp grassland, mangroves, drainage basins and other areas, including mountains. At present, the drafting of new national targets need to be ambitious but in tune with our realities. Ladies and gentlemen, despite the limitations imposed by the economic, financial and trade blockade imposed by the United States upon Cuba, which has been made worse recently in an unprecedented fashion, we reaffirm our desire to make progress with biological diversity and its sustainable use. Without an embargo, our country would have more access to financial resources, inputs and technologies, as well as fewer limits to its international cooperation, particularly South-South cooperation. Finally, Cuba reiterates its readiness to continue to participate actively to pinpoint best possible solutions so as to create a fairer world which is more environmentally healthy for future generations. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister, for your statement. I now give the floor to Luxembourg. I invite the Vice Minister of Environment, Climate and Sustainable Development, Andre Widenhout, to speak, to be followed by Switzerland. You have the floor.
Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, at the outset, I express my thanks to China, Canada, Quebec, the City of Montreal, and all its residents who are so kind. COP-15 is taking place at a time of multiple environmental crises: biodiversity, climate, resources, and pollution alongside geopolitical crises. COP-15 is a historic turning point for the future of biodiversity and humanity, and plays a key role in overcoming the challenges so as to establish a strong global strategic biodiversity framework, the GBF, with precise and robust goals. In the future, COP-15 should be known for having established the foundations for, first, establishing a cohesive global system of protected areas over at least 30% of land and marine surfaces. 2, to mobilize and align the necessary resources to fill the financing gaps. Thirdly, to integrate biodiversity protection in cross-cutting policies and to end environmentally harmful subsidies. And fourthly, we must go beyond standard economic indicators by establishing a quantitative goal on environmental impacts. COP-15 should in no way be the byword for the global community's failure to preserve our common future. Financial ambitions must be commensurate with the ambitions and quantitative goals of the GBF and vice versa. In this context, in my view, it is important to promote innovative initiatives and partnerships, facilitating the mobilization of private funds for sustainable projects. In addressing the synergies to deal with both the biodiversity and climate crises to the greatest extent possible, Luxembourg is using the largest part of its international climate financing to support nature-based adaptation projects. Luxembourg's international financing dedicated to biodiversity will be quadrupled by 2026. This is a key element in overcoming global challenges to biodiversity, even if the contribution of Luxembourg remains modest. Allow me to urge us all to act responsibly, generously, and both humbly and as visionaries to guarantee the success of this crucial COP. Dear colleagues, we have little time remaining to finish the work of the last 4 years and to wrap up a global framework which will go down in history as the moment where everything changed. I am optimistic that we will be able to do so before leaving Montreal, and we will be able to make COP-15 a great success. I thank you.
Thank you for your statement. I now give the floor to Switzerland. I invite Ms. Katrin Schnellenberg, State Secretary for the Environment, to speak, to be followed by Maldives. You have the floor.
Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, biodiversity is our very livelihood. It is the natural resource base for all life on Earth, fundamental for our well-being, prosperity, and ultimately our survival. But we all know biodiversity is threatened globally, but also on a local level in each and every country. Here at this COP, we need to adopt an ambitious framework to stop and reverse the loss of biodiversity. We need a framework with relevant, clear, and measurable goals and targets addressing the main drivers of biodiversity loss. We need a framework that is backed with headline indicators and a mechanism for planning, reporting, and review. We need a framework that is synergetic and embraces all biodiversity-related agreements and institutions, and that is supported by a comprehensive and effective approach to resource mobilization that addresses the real needs. Thereby, Switzerland fully endorses the target to preserve and protect 30% of our planet's surface on land and on sea for biodiversity by 2030. Mr. President, all relevant conventions have to contribute to the implementation of the framework. The Bern process had strengthened the involvement of these conventions in the development of the GBF. The Bern process should continue to promote the synergetic implementation of the GBF by all biodiversity-relevant conventions. Switzerland is ready to continue to support this process. We all know implementation needs support, and some of our partners do not have the capacity to implement the GBF alone. However, public money from traditional donors alone will not be sufficient. All parties that have the capacity must support those who need support, and all sources, domestic and international, public and private financial flows have to contribute to finance biodiversity and to align with biodiversity objectives. Dear colleagues, Let us now work towards an ambitious framework and to deliver on the CBD's vision of living in harmony with nature. I thank you very much for your attention.
I thank you, Madam Minister, for your statement. I now give the floor to Maldives. I invite Dr. Abdullah Nasser, Minister of State of Environment, Climate Change and Technology, to take the floor, to be followed by Uzbekistan. Mr. Nasser, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the Maldives would like to thank the People's Republic of China for the excellent leadership in holding the COP presidency. And we would also like to thank the government and the people of Canada for the exceptional hospitality here in Montreal. The Maldives is a large ocean state. Our coastal and marine biodiversity is what we depend on entirely. Coral reefs provide us life and livelihoods. We are making history here in Montreal when we adopt the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Addressing triple planetary crisis has become a question of our very own existence, and therefore we are calling for components of island biodiversity conservation to be fully integrated into the GBF. Effective implementation of the GBF and its monitoring framework are necessary to halt and reverse biodiversity loss and becoming nature positive. And to do this, it is necessary to align the means of implementation which are priorities of developing countries. We recognize the importance of nature financing, and we are doing what we can domestically. The Maldives has already started working on innovative, sustainable financing mechanisms, where we have introduced a green tax on tourism for the exclusive use of coral reefs, which contributes to a national green fund. We have also embarked on ambitious initiatives to value nature and incorporate natural capital accounting into our planning process. The Maldives endorses the 10-point plan for financing biodiversity, along with now more than 40 other countries. The Maldives has initiated numerous measures and actions towards reducing threats to biodiversity. We have started a project on ocean-wide marine spatial planning that will be aligned with the outcomes of Target 1. The target on restoration is immensely important for us. The Maldives, because we rely on fragile coral reefs and associated ecosystems, which are in critical need of restoration and recovery. We are calling for an ambitious area-based global conservation target, popularly now known as 30 by 30. Nationally, we have now declared more than 20% of our coastal and marine areas as legally protected. This includes more than 30% of coral reefs. This will be greatly enhanced further with the recognition of other effective area-based conservation measures in partnership with the private sector. Coastal and marine areas of the Maldives are a sanctuary for all species of sharks, rays, marine turtles, whales, dolphins, amongst many others, all protected by law. Mr. President, time is running out, especially for small island states who are at the forefront of biodiversity and this climate crisis. The responsibilities lie with all of humanity to ensure that nature survives and that we do not become the generation that takes away the right to a healthy environment from future generations. I thank you.
Thank you, Minister. I thank you for your statement. I now invite Uzbekistan to take the floor. I give the floor to the State Committee of the Chairman of the State Committee of the for Ecology and Environmental Protection, Mr. Ivan Dorov, to be followed by France. Moldov, Chairman Moldov, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dear ladies and gentlemen, heads of delegations. First of all, let me on behalf of Uzbekistan delegation express thanks to organizers, the Government of People's Republic of China and the Government of Canada for excellent organization and hospitality during this important event. Let me to extend my greetings to distinguished delegates, member parties, to all participants of CBD COP-15 meeting. Today marks significant milestone, launch of UN Decade of Action to Deliver Global Goals, UN Decade for Ecosystem Restoration, as well as international collaboration on ambitious post-2020 global biodiversity framework. The complexity of environmental challenges that we face today, combined with the impact of COVID-19 pandemic, clearly indicates the urgent need to establish platforms for dialogue and cooperation. Getting back on track to achieve sustainable development goals, addressing pressures of the climate crisis requires all of us to unite our efforts, going beyond individual problems toward formulating integrated solutions. We can and must ensure sustainable human development which is in harmony with nature. Uzbekistan has suffered severely from Aral Sea crisis, which resulted in huge biodiversity loss, land degradation, air pollution, generating multiple environmental challenges along the way. Formerly known as the fourth biggest lake in the world, the Aral Sea, losing nearly 90% of its water body, is now proclaimed as one of the biggest man-made environmental disasters. In 2017, with President Mirziyoyev's initiative, an extensive afforestation campaign targeting Aral seabed was launched, and as of today, almost 2 million hectares of seabed is planted with trees and seedlings. In 2018, the UN multi-partner Human Security Trust Fund for the Aral Sea region established, which became a reliable platform for the government of Uzbekistan and its shareholders, stakeholders and partners, including United Nations, international donors, as well as financial institutions. This joint platform aims to adopt a people-centric approach in tackling challenges caused by Aral Sea crisis. Together with the initiatives mentioned above, Government of Uzbekistan is supporting ongoing green environment campaign since 2021, Yashil Makon, with the goal of planting 200 million trees annually in the next 5 years. The main objective of this initiative is to plant 1 billion trees and increase green coverage of rural areas by 30% by 2030. Your Excellencies, on behalf of delegation of Uzbekistan, let me express our support and commitment to work with international community on post-2020 global biodiversity framework. We look forward to continued collaboration with CBD Secretariat, UNEP and UN organizations to conserve and restore nature, building on shared success and work together towards 2030 and beyond. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Minister, for your statement. I now give the floor to France. I invite Mr. Christophe Béchoux, Minister of Ecological Transition and Territorial Cohesion, to take the floor, following whom I'll give the floor to India next. France, you have the floor.
Merci, Monsieur. Thank you, Mr. President, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. The decline in biodiversity is unprecedented. France is rich in land-based and marine-based biodiversity and is aware of its global responsibilities to combat this alarming decline. We are establishing structured policies and quantifiable goals. 33% of our territory is protected. 200 species are covered by dedicated action plans. A goal of zero artificial elements on land is in the law by 2050. Thousands of wetlands are now protected, 3.6 million acres. At the national level, almost 2 3.5 billion euros have been pledged to biodiversity, including under the special fund with an allocation of approximately $2 billion. We support the development of a European framework for reporting so that businesses and financial institutions can measure and publish their impact on biodiversity. It is with the involvement of all actors and all countries that we will be able to protect biodiversity. This is why France envisages an ambitious global framework with quantitative goals, with a follow-up mechanism that is robust in nature, and there must also be a significant financial package which mobilizes public, private, domestic, and international funds. At the international level, the President, Emmanuel Macron, recently spoke against any exploitation of the marine seabed and has expressed views on how to preserve the carbon sinks so as to achieve the goal of 30% of terrestrial and marine areas by 2030. We have launched a coalition which now includes 106 countries. And now I wish to note that this will become more operational because it now has a permanent secretariat to support those who are carrying out projects so that these projects can be elaborated in the best manner possible. France will double its international contributions to biodiversity to reach, by 2025, 1 billion euros per year. We thus call on the Multilateral Development Bank and other institutions to make biodiversity their priority. Ladies and gentlemen, we only have a few days left to make this COP a success, and France is ready to work and negotiate to achieve an ambitious result.
I thank Your Excellency Minister for your statement, and I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Bhupendra Yadav, Minister of Environment, Forest and Climate Change of India. After that, it will be Mexico. Minister, I give you the floor.
Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we all acknowledge the credible action is the source of strength and optimism in facing all global challenges, including biodiversity. Despite India having 17% of the global population, but only 2.4% of the land area and only 4% of its water resources, we are forging ahead in our efforts. Our forest and tree cover is steadily rising together with our wildlife population. Definitive steps are being taken to return the iconic cheetah to Indian habitats. India has taken a quantum jump in the number of declared Ramsar sites to the current figure of 75. As a large developing country, our forest policy is challenging to implement, but our forest surveys are testimony to its success. India's balance sheet is implementing the HE target, is proactive and forward-looking, and India is on track to meeting its commitments. Similarly, our agriculture, as for other developing countries, is the source of life, livelihoods, and culture for hundreds of millions. Such essential support to vulnerable sections cannot be called subsidies and targeted for elimination. While they are being rationalized, biodiversity must be promoted through positive investment. Similarly, a numerical global target for pesticide reduction is unnecessary and must be left to countries to decide. India has taken numerous steps to keep invasive alien species at bay, but a numerical target is not feasible without the necessary baseline and relevant scientific evidence. Excellencies, the global biodiversity framework must be framed in the light of science and equity, and the sovereign right of nations over their resources as provided for in the Convention on Biodiversity. If climate is profoundly linked to biodiversity, then the principle of equity and common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities must equally apply to biodiversity. When nature itself is under stress because of the historical disproportionate and iniquitous CHG emissions of the developed countries, nature-based solutions to global warming and other environmental challenges are not an answer without resolute action by developed countries to measure up to their historical and current responsibilities. Nature cannot protect if it is not itself protected. Nature is the victim of global warming, and its proactive features can do little against unchecked temperature rise. We cannot only conserve, preserve, or restore. We must also promote sustainable use, and it is in the context that Honorable Prime Minister of India, Shri Narendra Modi ji clarion call for a people movement centered on lifestyle for environment, launched on 20th October 2022. Excellencies, the provision of the means of implementation must match our ambition. Only our source of funding remains the Global Environment Facility that caters to multiple conventions. The value of biodiversity to humankind also lies in its economic dimension alongside the cultural and social sustainable use and access and benefit sharing are the key to promoting biodiversity alongside the efforts to conserve, protect and restore. I reiterate that what is needed today is mindful and deliberate utilization instead of mindless and destructive consumption. In this context, our Honorable Prime Minister has launched the mission Life, which is the mass movement toward the environmentally conscious lifestyle. Embracing it, let us move forward toward the equitable and sustainable world by implementing the foundational principle of CBD, both in letter and spirit. It is in this spirit which has been captured so truly in the logo of India's G20 presidency, which calls for the one world, one family, or Vasudev Kutumbakam. Jai Hind.
I thank Minister Yadav for your intervention, and now I give the floor to the Vice Minister of Multilateral Affairs and Human Rights of Mexico, Her Excellency Martha Delgado Parata, to be followed by Croatia. Minister, I give you the floor.
Excellencias.
Excellencies, senior authorities and colleagues from all over the world, we are meeting at a crucial moment which will define the future of the world's biodiversity as well as our very existence. Mexico, as a mega-diverse party, is one of the parties which has more than 70% of global biodiversity and is thus duty-bound to make a contribution to the safeguarding of our biocultural heritage and the ancient traditions of indigenous peoples. Thus, Mexico encourages the adoption of a global biodiversity framework which recognizes the human right to a clean, safe, and sustainable environment, and which, in a cross-cutting fashion, has a human rights approach, intergenerational equity, and which respects the rights of indigenous peoples and local communities, guaranteeing their full and effective participation. Similarly, in keeping with our feminist foreign policy, Mexico is a steadfast proponent of Goal 22 for a gender-responsive framework. As part of the High Ambition Coalition, Mexico commits to protecting at least 30% of the world's lands and oceans by 2030. We highlight the importance of moving towards a sustainable ocean economy to avoid undue use and overexploitation of our oceans. This is the time to optimize the resources at our disposal and to find solutions. Recognizing the various range of national capacities, it is important to highlight that these ambitious goals can only be attained if means of implementation are made available. They must be sufficient, accessible, innovative, and sourced from all sources of public and private funds. With Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, Mexico, and Peru, we have presented a proposal to reform the Global Environment Facility, including the creation of a trust fund under the GEF, dedicated to the implementation of the post-2020 framework. This would ensure that there is agile channeling of resources. Mexico believes it is important to promote positive incentives and multifocal projects which generate co-benefits to address the multiple crises: biodiversity loss, climate change, desertification, and pollution. This in such a way that Mexico promotes synergies between the different environmental conventions, particularly the 3 Rio Conventions, and to strengthen food and water security, in line with the goals of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. In terms of physical genetical resources, this for Mexico is intrinsically linked to DSI. We steadfastly defend patent for free, prior and informed consent for this area. In terms of agroecology and the increase of productivity, this must be done in a way which is in harmony with nature, without allowing for the use or introduction of transgenic seeds. Finally, Mexico reiterates its commitment to multilateralism and issues an appeal for flexibility to be demonstrated by all parties to adopt a global framework post-2020 which is ambitious at this 15th Conference of the Parties to the Convention on Biodiversity. Thank you.
I thank Your Excellency for your statement, and I now give the floor to the State Secretary of Croatia, Mr. Kucanovic, to be followed by Togo.
Gentlemen, please allow me to express words of gratitude to our hosts for organizing this historical event. It's my great honor and privilege to be present here in Montreal. Today, we live in a time when biodiversity conservation and green policies are no longer a matter of choice, of luxury. They are the only path we should follow. The cost of not doing so will be immeasurably greater. To step up on the right track for biodiversity conservation, COP needs to set the global biodiversity framework that will be the driving force behind transformative change. Involvement of all relevant actors at all levels is decisive in this process. This transition requires close cooperation between policymakers, academia, relevant data, timely models, and a set of concrete measures for decision makers. Therefore, Croatia will establish a national center for climate and ecological transition as a center of expertise. Biodiversity and climate crises are closely related. Nature-based solutions fostering biodiversity play an important role in climate change mitigation and adaptation. That's why Croatia's approach will be nature-based solution first. In Croatia, we contribute significantly to reaching 30 by 30 target on land and sea. We have already protected more than 38 of our land. In the upcoming period, Croatia intends to contribute to the global goal by protecting 30% of maritime area within national jurisdiction. Failure to meet biodiversity targets is not only due to lack of nature conservation measures, but rather due to increasing pressures on environment. Croatia supports the full integration of biodiversity into all relevant sectoral policies. Mainstreaming biodiversity-friendly solution in bilateral ODA throughout all productive sectors is one of the key steps towards biodiversity neutral or positive impacts. Given the need for an ambitious, comprehensive, and transformative post-2020 GPF, it's vital to secure sufficient financing from all sources. Great responsibility lies with the business sector as well. Mere fact that so many are present here at COP-15 shows their commitment. We need businesses accountable for the impact on society and economy that benefits people and the environment. Neither sooner nor later, but now. World deserves global biodiversity framework that outlines a clear and predictable path towards transformative edge. I wish to thank you for all constructive work and invite you to support resolute and ambitious outcome of this meeting. Thank you.
I thank you, Minister. I thank you for your statement, and now I give the floor to the Secretary General of Environment and Forestry Resources of Togo, His Excellency Abdul Kafi Dimizu. After that, it will be Kazakhstan. Minister, I give you the floor.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, President. Ministers, distinguished delegates, the government of Togo wishes to congratulate the People's Republic of China for the excellent organization of this conference, and, by the same token, allow us to express our thanks to the government of Canada for facilitating the welcome of the delegations and the convening of this conference on Canadian territory. Togo appreciates all of the efforts deployed by the Executive Secretariat of the Convention in supporting countries in actions to halt the ongoing loss of biodiversity the world over. The theme of this ministerial segment, entitled Towards Ecological Civilization, Building a Shared Future for All Life on Earth, calls upon the most senior leaders in national institutions to spend their effort to implement the 2050 vision of the United Nations, which is, of course, living in harmony with nature, so as to contribute to the implementation of the global framework. Togo has expressed major ambition to plant 1 billion plants, to rehabilitate 1.4 million hectares of forest landscapes, and to extend forest coverage to more than 25% of her national territory by 2030. In addition, Togo has, among her national priorities, the adoption of specific new laws on species threatened by extinction, climate change, and protected areas, including marine protected areas. These different pledges are pillars upon which Togo intends to develop internal and external investment so as to contribute to the global effort for the post-2020 biodiversity framework. We understand that political will exists. However, what is critical here is the mobilization of resources. This is why, President, based on the position of the African Group, Togo is taking ownership of the 2050 vision of the United Nations and the Kunming Declaration on Ecological Civilization, and it cherishes the hope that particular attention be paid to the creation of a special fund for biodiversity, which has a solid mechanism for financing, including the use of genetic resources and DSI. Thank you.
I thank you, Minister, for your statement. And next, I give the floor to the Vice Minister of Ecology, Geology, and Natural Resources, Her Excellency Alia Sabekova of Kazakhstan, to be followed by Serbia. I give you the floor, Minister.
Distinguished colleagues, we express our gratitude to the government of China to organize the CBD COP-15 and the government of Canada to host it. Our presence here in this intervention is intended to confirm that the government of Kazakhstan remains a committed signatory to the Convention on Biological Diversity and recognizes the urgency of addressing the biodiversity crisis. Kazakh people have an ancient affinity with the natural world dating back to our nomadic origins. Now we are developing modern approaches to conserve and restore our rich natural heritage and maintain its central part in Kazakhstan's culture. Since our independence in 1991, we have created a strong framework of legislation to conserve and restore biodiversity. We have increased our state-protected areas to cover more than 10% of our territory. We are fully committed to expanding our protected areas network significantly. Our evidence-based decisions will focus on securing vital steppe grasslands, freshwater, desert ecosystems to maintain their biodiversity, enable recovery of iconic species, and ensure connectivity that benefits migratory species on land, across flyways, and along swimways by collaborating actively with those countries with whom we share nature. We have achieved our greatest success so far with Saiga antelope, up from less than 50,000 adults in 2007 to over 1.3 million this year. We warmly welcome a recent recognition by the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration of our Altyn Dala Conservation Partnership. However, this is only the beginning. We are forming bold plans to restore or reintroduce a series of other iconic species whose populations were depleted or destroyed historically. Our ambitions will be framed within our long-awaited National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan in 2025. We also signed up to the 10-point plan for financing biodiversity launched by the government of the United Kingdom as we face challenges in securing innovative long-term financing for our integrated biodiversity conservation efforts, and also in ensuring that the livelihood of rural communities also benefit equitably as a result of biodiversity conservation. Our approach is to use connections and synergy between conventions to address the impacts of climate change, desertification, and the international illegal wildlife trade. To achieve these aims, we remain open for collaborations across sectors and across geography, listening to stakeholders and experts from local to global levels to make our contributions to deliver what must be a truly ambitious post-2020 global biodiversity framework. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for your statement. Now I'd like to give the floor to State Secretary of Environmental Protection of Serbia, Ms. Sara Pavkov, who will be followed by Trinidad and Tobago. State Secretary, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Your Excellency, Ministers, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. Let me first extend my sincere gratitude to our hosts, the Government of the People's Republic of China, the Government of Canada, the Government of Quebec, the cities of Kunming and Montreal, and their people. I would like to use this opportunity to confirm that Serbia strongly supports an ambitious global biodiversity framework and the commitments from the Kunming Declaration. We appreciate all the efforts that have been made to finalize negotiations and prepare the GBF for adoption at this meeting. A significant progress has been made since the regional consultations on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework for CE region held in Serbia in 2019. In order to meet the objectives of the Convention at the historical turning point, we must conserve, restore, and sustainably use the element of the biodiversity. We must also quantify their value and develop indicators that will allow us to establish commitments and assess the implementation of such commitments. The eyes of the world are on us. We must mobilize all available resources in order to fulfill the 2030 mission and achieve the 2030 targets toward the 2050 goals and vision for biodiversity. It will otherwise be very difficult for us as a global community to reach the targets we have set to eradicate poverty, address climate change impacts, and meet all other objectives of the 2030 Development Agenda. I'm standing here with you today confident that we can deliver an ambitious global biodiversity framework that will put nature on the path to recovery and safeguard our irreplaceable biodiversity for generations to come. During the past period, significant effort was invested in developing nature protection policies in the Republic of Serbia. New protected areas were declared, thus increasing the territory under protection by almost 8%, while the ecological networks cover 20% of the territory. We are ready to update the nature protection program of the Republic of Serbia in accordance with the GBF. Since the regional cooperation plays a vital role for implementation of global biodiversity commitments, Serbia actively participates in the work of the Regional Biodiversity Task Force for Southeast Europe, which is in charge of implementing the biodiversity pillar of the Green Agenda for the Western Balkans. I would also use this opportunity to proudly announce that next year our country will host COP-15 of the Carpathian Convention. In conclusion, we call for additional efforts to secure means of implementation for all parties that had difficulties in financing such activities, and for further enhancement of cooperation at all levels, including the existing regional and sub-regional cooperation mechanisms. The global efforts we make are proof of our readiness to accomplish the vision of living in harmony with nature by 2050. Thank you.
谢谢国务秘书阁下的发言。现在呢，我邀请特立尼达和多巴哥规划和发展部副常务秘书里克·贾维德·阿里阁下发言，之后是希腊。阿里常务秘书阁下，有请。
I give the floor to the Deputy Permanent Secretary of Planning and Development of Trinidad and Tobago, to be followed by Greece.
Chair, distinguished delegates, the government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago echoes the gratitude expressed by other nations in thanking the People's Republic of China for its leadership in these critical negotiations of global significance. I also take this opportunity to thank the Government of Canada for its gracious hospitality and providing these excellent meeting facilities. Trinidad and Tobago is a twin island state situate at the southern end of the Caribbean chain of islands. Our biota and terrestrial habitats reflect the ecology of equatorial South America, and therefore has a high species diversity to surface area ratio. As such, environmental management and conservation are key priorities of the government, and this is reflected in our national development strategy. The global community, particularly small island developing states like Trinidad and Tobago, has faced its fair share of challenges in reversing biodiversity loss. Mr. President, we are at a critical juncture that will determine the fate of this planet and the life it sustains. Trinidad and Tobago recognizes the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, GBF, is a crucial avenue to foster collaboration and provide a long-term roadmap for action to achieve the 2050 vision of living in harmony with nature. I urge parties to continue working assiduously toward ensuring that the Global Biodiversity Framework targets are underpinned by science, are measurable, and allow for implementation in its entirety. Of particular importance to all small island developing states is closing the global biodiversity finance gap and achieving a comprehensive, ambitious, and just global biodiversity framework. This shall require increased financial resources from all sources and from parties. In Trinidad and Tobago, the Green Fund was established as our flagship national environmental fund that provides financial assistance to eligible community groups and organizations for activities related to reforestation, remediation, environmental education, and public awareness of environmental issues and conservation of the environment. The Green Fund is capitalized by a Green Fund levy of 0.3% on all gross sales of all receipts of companies operating in Trinidad and Tobago. And to date, over $55 million in grant funding has been dispersed to eligible entities. Accordingly, this fund remains available to local entities to access funding toward the implementation of projects in alignment with the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Mr. President, as members of the High Ambition Coalition and the Global Ocean Alliance, Trinidad and Tobago supports area-based conservation measures in alignment with the 30 by 30 target and is committed to the successful implementation of this ambitious target, having already made significant strides in the protection and management of our land space. Additionally, our country has established its biodiversity information system, which serves as a core repository of all biodiversity data and information. This will support informed decision-making for sustainable use of the country's biological resources. Further, in January 2023, the country will commence a rapid review of its National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan to ensure its alignment with the GBF goals and targets. In conclusion, Mr. President, as we move forward, Trinidad and Tobago recognizes that a healthy environment redounds to a healthy and productive citizenry. We hope that all the parties heed this call to action articulated in the Global Biodiversity Framework, and also hope that it shall continue to catalyze global efforts towards achieving the vision of living in harmony with nature. I thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Permanent Secretary, for your statement. Now I give the floor to the Deputy Minister of Environment and Energy of Greece, Mr. Georgios Amiras, who will be followed by Italy. Minister, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President, Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, dear colleagues. Firstly, allow me to thank the government of People of China for organizing this conference, and of course our Canadian hosts for their warm hospitality despite the snow outside. We are convening these days here in Montreal to adopt the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, reflecting that mankind must seriously deal with biodiversity loss in the years to come. Greece steadily supports the 2050 vision for biodiversity and the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and its 17 goals, in particular SDG 15, through several actions and measures. We have committed to revising our National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan in 2023 in order to comply with the post-2020 GBF and the European Biodiversity Strategy for 2030, aligned with our national strategy on climate change adaptation, the National Forest Strategy, as well as the recently adopted National Reforestation Plan, aiming to plant 20 million trees by 2026. As part of our effort to protect biodiversity, Greece becomes the first country in Europe to apply a special strict status to avoid ecosystem fragmentation for 8 so far significant mountains, the untrodden mountains, by forbidding the construction of any artificial surface or road. We are setting the same protection status for at least 1,000 unspoiled beaches. At the same time, Greece has recently drawn up its first national catalogue for invasive species, which will lead to the formulation of the related management plans. As for our ambitious commitments by 2030, let me provide some examples. We commit to legally protect 30% of our territory through well-managed protected areas and set 1/3 of them under strict protection. We also commit to the prohibition of fishing over 10% of Greek seas that will be no-take reserves, while we are committed to reduce by 50% marine plastic litter and by 30% microplastics released in the marine environment. Global cooperation and strict protection of biodiversity are crucial to tackle climate crisis. Greece, as a contracting party to numerous international or European environmental conventions, and also with its own initiatives, carries out both. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you for your statement. Now I give the floor to the Vice Minister of Environment and Energy Security of Italy, Ms. Vania Gava, who will be followed by Portugal. Minister, you have the floor.
Thank you. Distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I extend my warm greetings to all the participants. On behalf of the Italian government, I wish to express our deepest appreciation to the government of People's Republic of China and thanks the governments of Canada and Quebec for welcoming us. I also thank the CBS Secretariat for its hard work. Today, we have a unique opportunity to invest on the behalf of our planet and put people and nature at the very heart of our political agenda. Thanks to our collective efforts, we have now the chance to adopt an ambitious post-2020 global biodiversity framework with measurable goals and targets that will foster further action in halting and reversing biodiversity loss, and preserve and enhance the health of ecosystems. Through the ZBF, we will commit to completely address the drivers of ecosystems degradation, as well as species extinction, and give rise to transformative actions by mainstreaming biodiversity across sectors. In this context, nature-based solutions for climate change, mitigation and adaptation are crucial, as well as the conservation and restoration of marine and coastal biodiversity. Italy, in particular, being part of the High Ambition Coalition for People and Nature, aims to conserve at least 30% of its land and water by 2030, and is convinced we all need to be united to pursue this goal at the global level. Italy is committed to mobilize resources from all sources while enhancing efficiency of available resources. To close the global funding gap for biodiversity, it is needed that all parties together put efforts in mobilizing resources from all sources, domestic, international, public and private. And so, ladies and gentlemen, now is the time to act. We do not want to fail. Italy will strive for an adoption of ambition post-2020 ZBF to preserve nature for its intrinsic value as our common and fundamental heritage and build a sustainable, resilient, inclusive and fair world to hand over to our present and future generation. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister, for your statement. I now give the floor to the Secretary of State for Nature Conservation and Forestry of Portugal, Mr. João Paulo Catarino, who will be followed by South Sudan. I give the floor.
Your Excellency, Mr. Huang Runqi, Minister of Ecology and Environment of China, Your Excellency, Ms. Executive Secretary of the Convention on Biological Diversity, Ms. Elizabeth Maruma Mrema, distinguished ministers, heads of delegates and delegations, ladies and gentlemen, these are challenging times we live in. The world faces a triple threat. Biodiversity loss and climate change, along with rising levels of pollution, are indeed the greatest challenges of the 21st century. To halt and reverse biodiversity loss, we need to change our relationship with nature and begin a mission of peace with our planet. Ladies and gentlemen, Portugal is a country with an age-old culture which has opened the borders of the world and is very rich in biodiversity. It is located in a transition zone between three biodiversity-rich biogeographic regions, the Atlantic, the Mediterranean, and the Macaronesian, home to more than 35,000 species of animals and plants, i.e. 22% of all the species described in Europe and 2% of the world. Portugal was a pioneer in assuming the commitment of carbon neutrality by 2050. It also intends to reach 80% of renewable energies in electricity production already in 2026. Alongside with these commitments, it aims to have a defined policy in terms of biodiversity. We were pioneers in the establishment of a public policy for nature conservation. Since the early 1970s, we have created natural parks and reserves, which made all the difference in what the Portuguese natural heritage is today. During the last decade, thanks to cooperation between Portugal and Spain, it was possible to restore the population of the Iberian lynx, one of the most endangered wildcats in the world. In the last years, projects have been developed to restore and rebuild natural habitats in 19 protected areas, and a project to pay for ecosystem services is underway. Recently, the National Landscape Transformation Program was launched with the ambition to enhance natural capital and to prevent forest fires, one of the greatest threats to Portuguese biodiversity. In this context, Portugal in 2023 will organize the 8th International Conference on Wildfires, to which everyone is invited. So we invite everyone to participate in the 8th International Conference on Wildfires. In 2022 alone, Portugal created the largest marine protected area in the North Atlantic, covering almost 3,000 kilometers. Ladies and gentlemen, before the other parties to this conference, Portugal has already assumed its commitment to protect 30% of the land and sea by 2030. In that regard, we are working on creating new protected areas in the national network and under the Habitats Directive. We are a member of the High Ambition Coalition for Nature and People, of the Global Ocean Alliance, the Blue Leaders Group, and a friend of the SIDS Coalition for Nature. Today, before you, at this conference, Portugal is strongly committed to contributing to the adoption of the post-2022 Global Biodiversity Framework. It is our conviction that we are facing a critical opportunity to define decisive commitments in terms of world biodiversity and to build, together, as humanity, the path towards the recovery of nature. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your statement, Secretary of State. I now give the floor to South Sudan. I give the floor to the Honorable Joseph Africano Bartel, Undersecretary for Environment, to be followed by Romania. You have the floor.
Mr. President, Excellencies, Ministers, Heads of Delegation, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, South Sudan would like to commend the excellent stewardship of this COP by the People's Republic of China and also the government and people of Canada for hosting this conference in this beautiful city of Montreal and for the excellent hospitality accorded to my delegation. Mr. President, South Sudan is endued with vast variety of ecosystems, ranging from the largest wetland in Africa, which is the Sud, the forest, savanna, mountain, grasslands, and semi-desert. The Sud wetland supports one of the world's greatest mammalian migration of the Tiang and white-eared kob across the vast landscape of South Sudan, and a critical global migratory bird flyway convergence point. The ecosystems, their genetic resources, and associated traditional knowledge support the livelihoods of many populations in the country and contribute to the global environmental benefits. But these ecosystems are under threat from illegal logging, poaching, biopiracy, invasive alien species, climate change, unsustainable exploitation, land use changes, and conversion, dredging, pollution, natural disasters, among others. To address some of these challenges, South Sudan Cabinet approved and environmental policy in 2015, which enabled the accession to the Convention of Biological Diversity in 2014, and became the 194th member, and is in the process of acceding to the Nagoya and the Cartagena protocols, among other emirs. The country is in the process of finalizing an Environmental Management Act, which will be aligned with the provisions of the new biodiversity framework. It is worth noting that, guided by the NBSAP, the Minister of Environment and Forestry dedicated the GEF 6, 7, and 8 envelopes to address issues of biodiversity with emphasis of illegal wildlife trade and protected area management effectiveness. Accession to the Nagoya Protocol, awareness and capacity building, sustainable approaches in the Imatong ecosystems. The implementation of the MBSAP 2018 was only centered around resources from the Global Environment Facility, which is fit for purpose but very competitive, especially for the Nagoya and the Cartagena protocols. South Sudan supports a draft decision to be adopted on biosafety and specifically on the living modified organisms, being a landlocked country. To conclude, Mr. President, the Intergovernment Panel on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services report shows that science, policy, and practice are inseparable, and the drivers of biodiversity loss are crystal clear, and we cannot wait to act to reverse the trend. After this global biodiversity framework adaptation is action, and action cannot happen without resources, capacity building, and technical cooperation to ensure to live in harmony with nature, and the time is now. Thank you for listening.
And thank you, Minister, for your statement. I now invite Romania to take the floor. I give the floor to Secretary of State of Environment, Waters and the Forest, Mr. Yunif Sorin Banchu, to be followed by Sinkits and Nevis. Secretary of State Banchu, you have the floor.
Your Excellency, distinguished ministers and delegates, dear colleagues, please allow me to begin by thanking the CBD Secretariat for all the preparation involved for convening this high-level segment, a context which allows sharing our ambitions and views to build a shared future in the margins of the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. Biodiversity loss, land and ocean degradation, pollution, resource depletion, and climate change are accelerating at an unprecedented rate. The COVID-19 pandemic has shown us the necessity to take effective and urgent action to halt the loss of biodiversity and to ensure resilient ecosystems. It also reflects the fact that the risk of the occurrence and spread of infectious diseases is increasing due to the destruction of nature. Therefore, protecting and restoring biodiversity and the proper functioning of ecosystems are essential to enlarge our resilience and prevent the emergence and spread of diseases in the future. Romania, as a country with exceptional biodiversity, strongly supports an ambitious and implementable global framework aiming to put biodiversity on a path to recovery for the benefit of our planet and for us all. Also, Romania's government has committed to expand the area of strict protection in the national parks and to implement in the best possible way the EU Biodiversity Strategy for 2030. An ambitious post-2030 biodiversity framework is needed, and this requires a significant shift away from business as usual and a focus on synergies. There is growing consensus that we need to rely more on sustainable solutions that are in synergy with nature and supported by local communities. Achieving an ambitious post-2020 global biodiversity framework will require greater cooperation with international partners, increased support significant funding and phasing out biodiversity harmful subsidies. Everyone needs to be on board to achieve urgently the needed transformative change. Successful implementation of the new framework is critical for achieving the 2050 vision on living in harmony with nature. Ambitious targets are important, but they must be followed up with effective actions that will translate into improvements on the ground, hand in hand with the close monitoring. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister, for your statement. I thank you very much, actually, for the time saved, 30 seconds. I now give the floor to St. Kitts and Nevis. I invite Permanent Secretary of Environment Sharon Rutten to speak, to be followed by Uganda. Permanent Secretary, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Excellencies, with distinct honor, I address this plenary on behalf of the government of St. Kitts and Nevis. We express our deepest appreciation to the government of the People's Republic of China for effectively presiding over the COP for the past 4 years, and to the government of Canada for so graciously and ably hosting this important biodiversity conference. Like many of you here, St. Kitts and Nevis came to COP-15 ready to forge an ambitious and transformative post-2020 global biodiversity framework at the conclusion of this critical meeting. We welcome the Kunming Declaration as a robust platform that can drive political impetus towards the development of a strong and effective strategic framework. Mr. President, the global scientific evidence is overwhelmingly clear that the natural capital that our economies so heavily depend on has been declining at an alarming rate. An urgent action to restore and safeguard biodiversity is required now. Regrettably, despite the urgency of now, there remain significant resource and capacity gaps that limit effective action. Of course, the government of St. Kitts and Nevis joins with the other countries to support an implementation of ambitious and effective resource mobilization and capacity building strategies that are central to achieving the targets articulated in the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. We believe that policy coherence, partnerships, and synergies at all levels are essential for successfully developing the GBF. We affirm our commitment to applying a multi-sectoral approach to scaling up national conservation actions, including increasing our protected terrestrial system from 22.5% to 28% by 2025. Our recent stocktake underscored the criticality of an all-of-society approach to support the implementation of our National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan. St. Kitts and Nevis remain deeply committed. To this end, our newly elected Prime Minister, the Honorable Dr. Terence Drew, has declared St. Kitts Nevis as the first sustainable small island state. He is ably supported by our Minister, the Honorable Dr. Joya Clark, and the Minister of Energy, the Honorable Conwys Maynard. To add to that, we also have our Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Right Honorable Dr. Denzel Douglas. We firmly believe that this interministerial synergy will drive the impetus of investment and opportunities to transform our 104 square mile federation. We intend to promote understanding, build consensus, and leverage opportunities around 5 pillars: energy, water, food security, sustainable industries, and technology. Friends, St. Kitts Nevis is strengthening its resolve to pursue its strategic vision, to survive and to thrive. We welcome your cooperation, guidance, and assistance as we help each other to respond to the looming triple planetary crisis. Together, we can win. Thank you for your invitation, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Permanent Secretary, for your statement. I now invite Uganda to take the floor. I give the floor to Minister of State of Environment, Beatrice Atim Adwan, to be followed by Bosnia and Herzegovina. I give the floor to Madam Adwan.
Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, Uganda would like to congratulate People's Republic of China and the Government of Canada and the Secretariat of CBD for the excellent arrangements towards hosting of COP-15. I wish also to recognize the efforts of the Republic of Uganda and the Government of Canada in co-chairing the open-ended working group to facilitate development of an ambitious post-2020 biodiversity framework. Uganda is fully committed to ensuring a successful COP-15 with a global biodiversity framework that ensures harmonious coexistence between people and nature through sustainable socio-economic transformation of our societies, especially the local communities that depend on biodiversity. Uganda remains committed to the goals, ideals, and aspirations of the Convention, which are conservation of biological diversity, sustainable use of its components, and fair and equitable sharing of the benefits arising from utilization of the genetic resources. Any resolutions or decisions that deviate off the three ideals of the Convention would definitely not be supported by Uganda. Distinguished delegates, Uganda aligns herself to the position of Africa and other like-minded states in calling for a global biodiversity framework that is fully aligned to the Convention objectives. A framework that is ambitious but realistic and implementable, cognizant of the national capabilities and circumstances, the right to development, as well as equitable sharing of derivatives of genetic resources, including digital sequence information. We call upon all parties to pay particular attention to the means of implementation for the global biodiversity framework so that we do not get a beautiful document that will not make meaningful change to the biodiversity situation on ground. Finally, Uganda has already developed a 10-year national ecosystem restoration plan and integrated the current national biodiversity strategy and action plan into the national development plan, and all the key sectors are already mainstreamed. These efforts demonstrate the commitment of the political leadership of the government of Uganda in implementation of the Convention. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank you for your statement, Your Excellency. I now give the floor to Bosnia and Herzegovina to speak. I invite Assistant Minister of Foreign Trade and Economic Relations, Mirza Hujic, to be followed by Brazil. You have the floor, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to express my gratitude to the governments of China and Canada for their dedicated work to ensure a successful COP here in beautiful Montreal. Bosnia and Herzegovina is dedicated to the adoption and implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework as a new global decision on joint action to preserve species, ecosystems, ecosystem functions and services on which we depend. Although there is a concern for ambition level, Bosnia and Herzegovina stands behind the concept of each target, goal, mission, and vision of GBF. We are actively involved in the preparation of the framework for biodiversity, both through the work of the various bodies of the Convention as well as through expert work in the preparation of indicators. We consider an application of indicators in reporting to be demanding but necessary in the implementation of the objectives of the Convention. Up to now, Bosnia and Herzegovina have submitted all 6 regular reports to the Convention and will endeavor to further carry out the reporting obligation on a regular basis. After the submission of the last report, there are significant developments related to the implementation of the Convention in our country. On the path of its integration into the EU, Bosnia and Herzegovina overcomes barriers, many of which are related to issues of conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity and natural resources. One of the 6 Western Balkan countries, Bosnia and Herzegovina is signatory of Sofia Declaration supporting the Green Agenda for Western Balkans, which addresses climate and biodiversity crisis, pollution and other direct drivers of healthy environment, aiming for sustainable food and energy production system and circular economy development. With all efforts to join the EU, Bosnia and Herzegovina follows EU initiatives and undertakes activities in order to align the legal and institutional framework according to EU requirements. Bosnia and Herzegovina is in the process of adopting the State Environmental Strategy, ESAP 2030+, which was prepared with significant help from SIDA, Sweden. A special part of this strategy is dedicated to the conservation of biological and landscape diversity, in which, as one of the priorities, the need to revise the NBSAP in accordance with the post-2020 GBF is recognized. Other ESAP priorities are complementary to those GBF requirements that are already known, such as recognition of OECD areas and mainstreaming. We consider the building of institutional capacities and the development of a permanent dialogue between the scientific community and decision makers to be particularly important priorities. As for the implementation of the last mentioned priority, Bosnia and Herzegovina, with the kind help of IKI, Germany, and WCMC, is conducting a national ecosystem assessment. Through this process, we strive to improve the quality of decisions that affect the state of nature, but also to better focus our research in the direction of social needs. Last but not least, we do recognize the challenges of GBF implementation, such technical and human capacities and financial resources, complex institutional organization in the country, availability of biodiversity data, and lack of political will with economy sectors to prioritize biodiversity in their programs and policies. However, with an understanding of the global urgent situation, Bosnia and Herzegovina stands ready to increase efforts in implementation of objectives of conventions through new framework. Thank you very much.
I thank you, Minister, for your statement, and I now give the floor to the Deputy Minister of Environment, His Excellency Ms. Julie Messias of Brazil, to be followed by the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Chair. I speak on behalf of the Minister of Environment of Brazil, Mr. Joaquim Leite. Ms. President, authorities present, guests, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank the Chinese presidency for guiding us during this COP and express Brazil's full support to your leadership. As the most mega-diverse country, home to 20 of the world's biodiversity, Brazil is a fundamental part of the solution to health and preserve the global loss of biodiversity. COP-15 is a once-in-a-decade opportunity to reflect upon the implementation of the Convention and to promote its 3 pillars in a mutually supportive and balanced manner. As we move towards the conclusion of this COP, our effort to finalize the GBF must be guided by a renewed sense of international cooperation and solidarity, the same spirit that paved the way for the adoption of the Convention on Biological Diversity 30 years ago. The persistent inequalities among development and developing countries are a stark reminder
that our efforts to protect biodiversity must go hand in hand with equally ambitious commitments to support the Global South. Brazil is fully committed to ambitious conservation and restoration targets to be a practical solution to the biodiversity loss worldwide. We watch our ambition with a pinch of reality. Our targets must be archivable in order to be more than strong words in a paper. Brazil is also aware that the best way to protect nature is to address people's social vulnerability and support sustainable livelihoods by recognizing and respecting the traditional knowledges of indigenous peoples and the local communities. Mr. Chair, therefore, a truly ambitious GBF must guarantee a new additional financial resources, capacity building, technical and scientific cooperation, and technology transfers to support developing countries. Therefore, the developing countries will undertake to fulfill the goals and the targets to the post-2020 GBF must be equally based on a robust set of support mechanisms, including a dedicated global biodiversity fund, innovative financial instruments such as payments for ecosystem service and multilateral mechanisms for benefit sharing arising from the DSI use. We need houses, cities, roads, railroads, and farms, but we also need to protect the biodiversity, forests, and seas. Brazil is an excellent example of this, with 66% of its native forests and 30% of its vast sea area protected, aligned with our tropical agriculture that is a record-breaking in food production. The result of modern and efficient techniques that protects the soil and fix carbon from the atmosphere in the production process, and the protection of native vegetation within private properties ranging from 20% to 18%. The results of this conference should bring social, economic, environmental benefits for all countries, in particular developing countries and especially the mega-diverse countries. Mr. Chair, Brazil is confident that the Chinese presidency will steer us towards the necessary spirit of solidarity to enable a successful and archivable post-2020 GBF with equal communities for all parties. Thank you.
I thank you, Ms. Minister, for your statement. And next, I give the floor to the Director General of Nature Conservation Bureau of the Ministry of Environment of the Republic of Korea, Your Excellency, Mr. Kim. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. President, excellent, distinguished delegate. The biodiversity loss is accelerating at an unprecedented rate. It poses great threat to the humanity on par with the climate crisis. To ignite global level actions to stop the biodiversity crisis, just as global climate actions, COP-15 needs to adopt an ambitious global framework that will help the world take one significant step to conserve biodiversity and ecosystems. I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to the government of China and Canada and the Secretariat for their dedicated effort to prepare this long-awaited historic event. The Republic of Korea stands ready to join the global commitment to halt the loss of biodiversity. Our effort for the biodiversity conservation as a national agenda include promoting ecosystem service payment system, expanding protected area, and identifying OECMs, increasing ecological areas through restoration, restoring endangered species, and promoting policies for wildlife inspection and enhanced disease controls. As the president of COP-12, the Republic of Korea is striving to live up to that expectation. In order to contribute to implementing of the post-2020 GBF, we will continue to support various initiatives under the Convention on Bio-Rich, Biodiversity Dialogue, Forest Ecosystem Restoration, and Sustainable Oceans. We also plan to increase the green ODAs by 2025 to above OECD average to identify and facilitate projects to respond to the climate and biodiversity crisis. We will contribute to global effort by mobilizing domestic resources and aligning financial flows with biodiversity through a new MB Shop. We will also continue to work with our partners to conserve biodiversity and share our knowledge and experience with the global community. For instance, we held IUCN Leaders Forum this October in Jeju, where global leaders discussed building nature-positive economies and societies. We also processing establishment of global research and training center on internationally designated areas under the auspices of UNESCO. Excellence, over the last 4 years, we have had very difficult negotiations. We are on the verge of adopting a new global biodiversity framework. Let us be united in our will to protect the earth. Let us adopt and start implementing this GBF after adoption, after this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, the Director General Kim. Now I give the floor to His Excellency Dr. Khalid bin Rashid Al Mansouri, Ambassador of the State of Qatar to Canada, to be followed by Mongolia.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الشكر موصول للصين وكندا.
We thank China, Canada, and the international organizations as well as the Secretariat. Ladies and gentlemen, it is obvious to everyone the important role of the UNDP in assisting countries to achieve the SDGs to reduce the risk of deterioration of biodiversity that the planet is witnessing, as well as ensuring greater environmental systems. The state of Qatar takes into consideration the permanent sustainability strategy in all its current and future projects and plans. This was clearly reflected during its hosting of an exceptional edition of the World Cup. Qatar focused particularly on treating waste resulting from the World Cup, and it was our country's ambition to achieve the first carbon-free World Cup edition. This is not our first experience, but it was preceded by another successful experience. During the organization of the SDGs, here we plan to dismantle the seats in the stadiums that hosted the World Cup, and then we will send these seats to developing countries as a contribution to improving the sports infrastructure of those countries. Qatar was one of the first to submit its sixth report on the CBD in 2019, indicating in its first strategy in 2004 a commitment to the convention. We are ensuring that our action plan to meet the requirements of achieving the balancing between components of sustainable development and economic prosperity on the one hand, and to alleviate the pressures on the components of biodiversity on the other side has been established. The Laws have been adopted to protect habitats and preserve species. Designated programs are being pursued to protect endangered species such as sea turtles, dugongs, and whale sharks. Moreover, we have improved institutional capabilities to enhance biodiversity and in spreading or increasing our terrestrial and maritime protected areas. This is under the Global Biodiversity Framework. Moreover, we will continue to support the preservation of wildlife, ensuring a balance between what is being carried out currently and our aspirations for the future. And we want to ensure a continued flow of financing. I think.
感谢您的发言。
I thank you for your statement. And next, I give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Aryambol Yatma, Ambassador of Mongolia to Canada, to be followed by Burkina Faso. Ambassador, I give you the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to extend my warmest greetings to all of you who gathered here in Montreal to endorse the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Our sincere appreciation goes to the governments of the People's Republic of China and Canada, as well as Secretariat of CBD for successful organization of the conference. Mongolia has deep belief that the parties to the COP-15 reach an ambitious, achievable, and yet measurable post-2020 GBF. Implementation of the participatory and inclusive GBF by all parties and stakeholders, regardless of the level of development, is of utmost importance. Mongolia is encouraging countries to strengthen their synergies among climate change, land degradation, desertification, and biodiversity issues in the implementation of the framework at national, regional, and international levels. As a member of High Ambitious Coalition, Mongolia is committed to increase its current 21% protected area to 30% by 2030 and to 35% by 2050. To reach this target, we will take freshwater basins and primary forest ecosystems under state protection and give special considerations to human-induced risky, intact grasslands and unique ecosystems that absorb most carbon. With appreciation to the development partners, Mongolia has gained well knowledge and experience to identify key biodiversity areas and connectivity sites in line with international acknowledged guidelines, and localized offset credit mechanism to accommodate the environment, social, and economic balance and development project, which also can be counted as the result-based management methods for the conservation. Mr. Chair, Mongolia is one of the countries which is most vulnerable to climate change due to its geographical and climate conditions, economic sector structure, development level, and the population's lifestyle. To ensure long-term financial mechanism both for climate change and biodiversity, as well as to achieve CDGs and efforts to contribute to the global environmental agenda, developing countries like Mongolia greatly need capacity building, innovative and holistic approaches such as natural resource account methodology, introduction of ecosystem service payment principles, nomadic heritage and traditional knowledge, inclusive ecotourism development, and sustainable and resilient infrastructure. The 1 Billion Trees national movement initiated by the President of Mongolia, Ukhnagh, is being implemented with support of active and strong commitment from all stakeholders in and out of Mongolia. I believe that the movement shall restore high part of degraded land, strengthen traditional knowledge, establish a strong dedicated partnership, and good practice fighting against environmental tripartite crisis. Thank you for your attention.
I thank you, Ambassador, for your statement. And now I give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Severine Bationo Kansono, Minister Councillor and Chargé d'Affaires of Burkina Faso, to be followed by the Kingdom of Morocco. Minister Councillor, I give you the floor.
Thank you, President. At the outset, I would like to express my thanks to you and thank the people of Canada and its government for their hospitality. We also thank the People's Republic of China for having supported this major event. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, my country, Burkina Faso, via its government, is mindful of the vital goals of conserving biological diversity and is setting out many actions to this effect. Thus, within our development plan, Burkina Faso has a strategic goal, which is to reverse the trend we see of environmental degradation to favor climate resilience and greenhouse gas emission reduction. Thus, a monograph on Burkina Faso in 2020 stated that the country had many species, including trees, over 100 species of fish, wild birds, and so on and so forth. This heritage is a major component of the environmental balance we have in our country, and it hosts much of our sub-region's biodiversity. This is on our territory of 213,000 kilometers, which includes natural parks, biosphere reserves, one of which has been recognized as UNESCO World Heritage, as well as designated forests. The exploitation of these genetic resources contributes 35% to GDP and around 30% of exports. To man-made changes, we must now add, over recent years, the impact of armed conflict and the damaging effects of climate change. We are under pressure from many fronts. Thus, we are ever more concerned by the high number of species at risk in our country. In the light of this scourge, major actions organized within a global framework mobilizing all actors is necessary. This is why Burkina Faso stands in solidarity with the Kigali, Kunming declarations, the ECOWAS declaration, and also supports the global biodiversity framework for after 2020. President, Burkina Faso, via me, would like to promote the adoption of a post-2020 GPF for which it supports all of humankind to ensure that we can conserve biological diversity for all peoples and safeguard all forms of life on Earth. However, we are mindful of the need, the critical need, in fact, to have an effective mechanism established to mobilize resources, allowing for additional biodiversity financing. Thus, we support the position of the African Group on this issue of significant resource mobilization. Thank you, President.
I thank Minister Councillor for his statement. I now give the floor Ambassador of His Majesty the King of Morocco in Canada, of Kingdom of Morocco, Ms. Souria Otmani, who will be followed by Poland. You have the floor.
Monsieur le Président,
President of COP-15 of the UN Conference on Biodiversity, delegates, the Kingdom of Morocco is pleased to take part in the high-level segment of the second part of COP-15 and thanks the Government of China, the Government of Canada, and Quebec, as well as the CBD Secretariat for their hospitality and the excellent organization of this important event, whose goal is to reach a common position to address the biodiversity crisis. With this in mind, Mr. President, Morocco, at the outset, would like to express its full support to the position expressed by the Minister of the Republic of Congo on behalf of the African Group this morning. As were stressed in those statements made before that of my delegation, the theme of this high-level segment, ecological civilization, building a safe shared future for all life on Earth is an important call to take care of our planet, our natural environment, its elements, and in particular of its precious biodiversity, here at a time when humanity is facing many crises, environmental crises due to climate change, various types of pollution, in particular air pollution, and finally with the biodiversity loss and a serious threat affecting 28% of species studied by the IUCN. All these facts, Mr. President, require the adoption of a post-2020 GBF, which must be ambitious and focus on the fact that measures are absolutely necessary to be carried out at the global, regional, and local levels to transform our economic, social, and financial methodology. Only the effective implementation of this global framework will indeed contribute to stabilizing biodiversity loss over the next 10 years, to reestablish ecosystems over the next 20 years, and to achieve the vision of the conference by 2050, that of living in harmony with nature. It is clear that the establishment of this framework moves through the investment mobilization, which would allow for capacity building, technology transfer, for the promotion of global partnerships, and north-south, south-south, and triangular cooperation. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the recent ratification by the Kingdom of Morocco of the Nagoya Protocol bears witness to its constant commitment to working in international fora to establish international agreements, and it shows Morocco's will to fight against the biopiracy of its genetic resources. Morocco has carried out strategies and plans for biodiversity so as to align the national plan with that of the global framework. In our 6th national report, we noted that we have carried out significant plans in the legal and operational sectors, which are complementary to Morocco's sustainable development plans. We aim to reforest 100,000 hectares by 2030. We are also working to ensure that the provisions of international accords will be implemented, and thus our representative was elected as a representative to the Conference on the Environment. Morocco's commitment to protecting the environment and biodiversity are shown in our ambitious measures that we've been carrying out under the guidance of our King Mohammed VI, and I wish you every success in the work of this convention, in this conference. Thank you.
谢谢大使阁下的发言。
I thank the ambassador for your statement. I now give the floor to the ambassador of the Republic of Poland in Canada, Mr. Witold Cielski, who will be followed by Guatemala. I give the floor, Mr. Ambassador.
Is okay? Honorable ministers and high representatives of parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity, ladies and gentlemen, it is my great honor and pleasure to be here with you and deliver the statement on behalf of Ms. Anna Moskwa, Minister of Climate and Environment, Republic of Poland. Poland's biodiversity is one of the richest in Europe and is supported by a long tradition of nature protection. We have almost 40% of our territory covered by protected areas, including 23 national parks, 124 landscape parks, and almost 1,500 nature reserves. Almost 30% of our territory is covered with forests, managed in a sustainable way for many decades. Over 1,800 species of fungi, plants, and animals living in Poland are protected. Populations of many charismatic species like otter, peregrine falcon, or European bison, key species like beaver, and even large predators like wolf, which are indicators of a high level of biodiversity in Poland, are revived spectacularly. These days we are working very hard in order to develop a new global biodiversity framework. which aims at halting biodiversity loss all over the world. Involvement of all stakeholders at all levels is crucial for its successful implementation in the coming years. Regional instruments can help and show the way how to achieve it. A good example of such regional instruments is the Carpathian Convention, a legally binding agreement for protection and sustainable development of that mountainous region, shared by 7 countries in the central part of Europe. The Carpathians are a mountain range of global importance and a center of nature biodiversity in Europe, representing some of Europe's most significant remaining areas of natural ecosystems, providing essential habitat and refuge for the biggest population of large carnivores and many endangered species. Poland, as a current presidency of that convention, has organized in November this year a ministerial conference in Rzeszów, which among other issues discussed the implementation of biodiversity goals in the Carpathians. Ministers present at that conference adopted a declaration recognizing that the Carpathian Convention provides a regional mechanism for the implementation of the Convention on Biological Diversity and its new post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework in the Carpathians, translating the global goals and targets to the regional level and thus enhancing implementation in the region. Ministers declared that they will, number 1, examine the possible input of the Carpathian region in the implementation of global goals and targets that will be adopted as part of the GBF at Conference of the Parties to the Convention on Biodiversity. 2, develop and implement the revised strategic action plan to the Carpathian Convention Protocol on Biodiversity that will reflect agreed post-2020 GBF and its goals and action targets, which shall be comprehensive and ambitious instruments to implement transformative actions by various stakeholders in order to achieve CBD-2050 vision to live in harmony with nature. 3, support the signing and the implementation of the revised Memorandum of Cooperation between CBD, the Alpine Convention, and the Carpathian Convention in the light of the new post-2020 GBF to enhance synergies and initiate common activities for the implementation of this new framework, as well as for sharing experiences with other mountain regions in the world. 4, promote mainstreaming in biodiversity within and across sectors by using the integrated approach of the Carpathian Conventions towards sustainable development and towards better implementation of the Agenda 2030 and relevant sustainable development goals. Carpathian countries stand ready to share their experiences in the fulfillment of above commitments with other regions and the whole CBD family. Thank you.
谢谢大使阁下的发言。现在我邀请危地马拉驻加拿大大使纳尔逊、拉斐尔、奥里弗、加西亚阁下。
Thank you, the ambassador, for your statement. I'll now give the floor to the ambassador of Guatemala to Canada, Mr. Nelson Rafael Olivero Garcia, who will be followed by Fiji.
Thank you very much, President. On behalf of the President of Guatemala, Dr. Alejandro Jumaki Faya, and on behalf of my country's government, allow me to thank the people and government of Canada as the host nation of the presidency, as well as thanking the presidency and the Secretariat for holding these important meetings in this beautiful city of Montreal. Guatemala is a mega-diverse country with a variety of ecosystems, species, and genetic diversity of global importance, with a population which is rich in culture and with a broad traditional knowledge. Thanks to this, my country, over the years, and especially during this current administration, under our current president, has fostered incentives to conserve our forest and to sustainably use our extensive biodiversity. In addition, robust work is being done to drive down deforestation. This is being done via successful cases of forest concessions being granted to local communities and has been considerably boosted by reforestation and carbon sinks. there has been the effective strengthening of the management, protection and the monitoring of the Guatemalan system of protected areas, which now stands at 31% of my country's territory. In addition, work is being done on the conservation of marine and coastal areas. President, the principal priorities of Guatemala in terms of the global biodiversity framework and COP-15 are: 1. The adoption of the global framework for the protection of at least 30% of land and water. 2. The creation of a new financial mechanism which is specifically designed for biodiversity. 3. The commitment to considerably increase the mobilization of financial resources both at national and international level in accordance with Article 20 of the Convention. 4. The adoption of a clear decision on possible solutions for a global repatriation of benefits system, recognizing that DSI is derived from genetic resources and that much of this information is connected to traditional knowledge. 5. The future decision on the working group on Article 8J, strengthening the work of that important working group. And 6, in terms of traditional use and customs of traditional people, this is also important. To conclude, Guatemala has participated actively in the debates of this COP with the hope of adopting a new strategic plan for biological diversity which should be robust and ambitious. Thus, there need to be clear and transparent cooperation mechanisms based on the notion of shared but differentiated responsibilities, always increasing our links of cooperation and mutual support to conserve our planet for generations today and yet to come. Thank you very much, President.
I thank the Ambassador for your statement. Now I give the floor to Ambassador and Permanent Representative of Fiji to the UN, Mr. Satyendra Prasad, to be followed by Algeria. I give the floor, Ambassador.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I thank the government of China for its excellent stewardship of COP-15. Thank the government of Canada for generously hosting us, and to this great city of Montreal for what is surely the most consequential biodiversity conference in our generation. It is so consequential because we can walk away from here with a business as usual of an outcome. That will surely mean a future of economic devastation and widespread biodiversity collapse. We can, on the other hand, walk away with an alternative and a better outcome, an outcome where we give our natural world, our lands, our ocean, a fighting chance, and ultimately humanity itself its fighting chance. Excellency, Fiji is committed more than ever before to doing more than its fair share. We are expanding protection across our pristine 2.3 million square miles of Blue Pacific. We are committed to highly protecting 50 terrestrial and ocean biodiversity areas. We are expanding our primary forest cover. We are expanding the protection of vital reef systems. We are expanding protection of our mangroves. We are harnessing the energy of our young, of our coastal communities by launching 10,000 jobs for nature. We are advancing ecosystem restoration and nature-based solutions to our infrastructure. We are extending our moratorium on seabed mining. We are working together with our fellow small island developing states because together the Blue Pacific is home to more than 10% of global terrestrial biodiversity and over 40% of ocean biodiversity. This is what is at stake for us in the Blue Pacific and indeed for the world. We stand to lose this all if the world does not do its part by staying within the 1.5 degrees Celsius temperature rise. So we are here, called by history to do the right thing today. We are so close to so many planetary tipping points. The right thing at this point in history, when our biodiversity and natural world faces near collapse, is to deliver a CBD framework that gets the job done, and that is to return our natural world to a path of stability and restoration. Getting the job done includes highly protecting 30% of the world's ocean. It means protecting 30% of our lands. Getting the job done means that to those who must offer the resources on scale and in ways that are accessible by small island states. Getting the job done means to those who can to offer significant new investments to support our global effort to return our planet and life onto a pathway of stability. We must leave Montreal with a GBF that gets the job done within the decade. That must surely mean giving to future generations a fighting chance to live life as we have known it. There is another option. We can take it Montreal. That is, we can walk away having monumentally failed to agree a post-2020 GBF. That would be tragic. The stake on us, member states, could not have been higher. We are meeting in a historic window where we still have some playing time. We are now in overtime zone, in the code red. We know, using a football analogy, that there are no penalty kick options to kick our natural world onto a path of stability. We only have us, the 196 member states of the CBD, and we have this rapidly closing window of opportunity during which we can still exercise leadership and offer hope. Fiji stands ready to work with the international community to deliver a Kunming, Montreal moment for nature. This is within our grasp. Let us get the job done. I thank you. Pinaka Wakalevu.
I thank the Ambassador for your statement. I now give the floor to the Ambassador of Algeria to Canada, Mr. Noureddin Bardat Daiji, who will be followed by Paraguay. Ambassador, you have the floor.
سيد الرئيس، السادة والسيدات الحضور، اسمحوا لي أن
Ladies and gentlemen, allow me at the outset to express my thanks to the Canadian and Chinese authorities for their efforts in preparing this conference that brings us together here. The international situation shows the importance of rehabilitating ecosystems. These are elements that play a crucial role in ensuring the balance between economic growth and conserving biodiversity. We also must focus on eco-services and traditional knowledge, which are one of the bases for sustainable development policies. Algeria spares no effort, Mr. President, to conserve its flora and fauna due to the threats to this biodiversity, including fires, floods, and so on. We have a plan of action aimed at conserving ecosystems and ensuring sustainable management and value. We are working to create a green wall in Algeria through our national policies, and this between 2023 and 2024 by creating new startups as well as environmental projects and work opportunity for the youth. We are also calling on all environmental services to create local cooperatives that focus on the sustainable use of ecosystems, which allows 8 million women, rural women, to work and contribute to the economic and social development of the country. Algeria recently has developed its institutional and legal framework to address the issue of biological resources and the related traditional knowledge, as well as the just and equitable sharing of the benefits of genetic resources. And we have but to put this framework into action. International consultations have been carried out on biodiversity, and they must take into account the requirements of our food systems and energy systems, those in developing countries. Policies must preserve biodiversity while at the same time ensuring health, food security, and the achievement of the SDGs. It is crucial that the international community work to establish a framework and to guarantee the balanced implementation of all the provisions of the convention, taking into account Article 20 of the convention, which enshrines the principle of common but differentiated responsibility. The countries of Africa cannot achieve these goals without technical and financial support. In this framework, the international community must work under Article 21 of the Convention to mobilize resources, and we must work to accelerate technology transfers to developing countries, and we must work to build the capacity of states to be able to address these challenges facing biodiversity. The post-2020 GBF takes into account the DSI as well as ABS, and this is important. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for your statement. I now give the floor to Paraguay. I invite His Excellency Raul Montel, Ambassador of Paraguay to Canada, to speak, to be followed by United Republic of Tanzania. So you have the floor.
The Republic of Paraguay expresses its sincerest thanks to the Government of Canada for their hospitality, as well as the Presidency of COP-15 and the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity for the organisation of this meeting. We believe that the global framework for biological diversity following 2020 and the measures which have been implemented must be in keeping with multilateral agreements rather than being a barrier to countries' development, respecting local realities and social, environmental and other factors. We recognise that our most important challenge is essentially based on the fact that these goals are not sufficiently operative and do not allow us to make progress with effective implementation to conserve biological diversity. Due to this, we believe it is urgent to make progress in drafting a global framework which needs to be genuinely beneficial to all nations here present. In Paraguay, agriculture and cattle and animal husbandry help to reduce poverty and are important sources of growth for local communities and indigenous peoples in keeping with the SDGs. We thus believe that trade is an ally to allay current inequalities, and that the global framework should not create new barriers. Promoting technologies, and including genetic technologies, to generate efficiencies in production and use of resources is one possibility. This is why it is important to ensure that we continue to treat biotechnology in the specific goals, including within the CBD and its protocols. We cannot deny the value of genetic information for wildlife and for the distribution of benefits, the sharing of benefits. Benefits arising from the use of wild genetic resources, particularly those linked to traditional knowledge, must be available to all parties to the CBD, always adopting a scientific approach, irrespective of whether the country in question is a party to the relevant protocols. Local communities and indigenous peoples are critical here, as well as women and girls, in all decision-making linked to biodiversity. We believe that cooperation to preserve ecosystems and their components is critical, bearing in mind historic responsibilities as well as national capacities in terms, bearing in mind the development level of developing countries, particularly landlocked developing countries. We trust in the usefulness of international cooperation to promote exchange between our countries in the context of the drafting of national strategies on biodiversity and the global framework to address the causes of biodiversity loss and the adoption of policies and measures to ensure conservation and sustainable use in inclusive fashion. Finally, we take advantage of this opportunity to highlight this decade importance, and alongside Argentina and Brazil, we have been striving to restore Atlantic forests. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador, for your statement. I now invite the United Republic of Tanzania to speak. I give the floor to Dr. Mapuki Urisobisia, High Commissioner of the United Republic of Tanzania to Canada, to be followed by Peru.
The President of COP-15, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. The statement is made on behalf of the Honorable Minister Selemani Jaffo, the Minister of State, Vice President's Office, Environment. On behalf of my delegation and my own self, allow me to register my congratulations to you, Mr. Chairman and President, and members of your Bureau for steering the process that culminated in the preparation of the Global Environmental Framework. We register our appreciation to the governments of the people of the People's Republic of China and Canada for co-hosting this meeting and for the hospitality rendered in this beautiful city of Montreal. This registration of appreciation and commendation will not be complete without expressly mentioning the Executive Secretary, Madame Elizabeth Maruma Mrema, and the entire CBD Secretariat for the groundwork manifested in the timely availability of relevant documents, making our deliberations sound during this COP. Mr. President, the United Republic of Tanzania aligns itself with the statement made by Congo on behalf of the African Group. Tanzania is one of the mega biodiverse countries in the world. It recognizes the importance of biodiversity and the benefits it renders to the human well-being and a healthy planet. About 40% of the total terrestrial area of our country is designated as forest and wildlife protected. 6.5% of the territorial marine area is gazetted as protected and reserved, demonstrating our will to prioritize conservation of biodiversity while at the same time fostering sustainable use of its components, despite management challenges shared by other developing countries. The Global Assessment Report on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services issued by IPBES cautioned that goals of conserving sustainable use of biodiversity and achieving sustainable development cannot be met by the current trajectories. The biodiversity goals of 2030 and beyond may only be achieved through a transformative process of changes across economic, social, political, and technological factors. The ongoing rapid decline of biodiversity, ecosystem functions, and many of nature's contributions by people mean that most international societal and environmental goals, such as the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, will not be achieved on the basis of current status quo trajectories, undermining the other goals as specified in the Paris Agreement, adopted under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and the 2050 Vision for Biodiversity. Mr. President, we note the excellent work done by parties in preparation for the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, where constructive and ambitious discussions have taken place and still are. The framework sets out on ambitious plans to implement broad-based transformative actions to bring societal change with a view to realize the vision of living in harmony with nature by 2050. We need to be mindful of the need for a framework with actions and targets whose implementation has been proposed by developing countries. Tanzania supports the proposed implementation, including the establishment of a global biodiversity fund to fill the current biodiversity financing gap. Number two, the establishment of a multilateral benefits sharing mechanism to utilize the digital sequencing information. And lastly, a sustainable practical capacity building development initiatives and a technology transfer without which none of the targets of the Global Biodiversity Framework will be realized. Mr. President, the United Republic of Tanzania is keen to see that the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework is consistent with the commitments, frameworks, processes, and plans established under other multilateral environmental agreements, offering greater opportunities for the mainstreaming of biodiversity across society and develop synergies with other processes. Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I assure you of Tanzania's unfaltering commitment to cooperate for the best outcomes of this conference of the parties, and I want to thank you for your attention.
Thank you, High Commissioner, for your statement. I now give the floor to Peru. I give the floor to Ambassador Roberto Rafael Rodriguez Armilis to take the floor, to be followed by Republic of Congo. Sir, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, President. Distinguished heads of delegation, delegates. At the outset, I would like to echo those who have spoken before me to express my thanks to the Chinese presidency for their leadership in managing this process, as well as the Canadian government for having kindly welcomed us with their traditional hospitality. Let me also thank the CBD Secretariat for their invaluable and constant support. Peru, as a megadiverse country, is steadfastly committed to the conservation and sustainable utilization of biological diversity, and we reaffirm the need to achieve a global framework for biodiversity post-2020. This must be clear and ambitious. It needs to be effective so as to turn the tide on biodiversity loss the world over. And this will be the basis of sustainable development for developing countries such as my own. In terms of goals, we believe it is critical to conserve at least 30% of land areas, continental waters, and marine areas, protecting ecosystems, sustainably using them, and safeguarding species which are sources of resources for local communities and indigenous peoples. We send out a call to all parties to support these critical elements to the global framework. President, allow me to offer a few examples of how Peru has made progress with these conservation measures. First of all, I'm pleased to announce that Peru is reporting the first two omics on protected areas with the Alta Guaybamba and Los Amigos protected areas. These make up more than 3 million square kilometers. Another important effort is the recent creation of a national reserve, Torsal de Nazcas, which is the first protected national area which is 100% at sea. In addition, we are promoting the drafting of programs and policies linked to conservation and the sustainable use of wildlife, fauna, and to mobilize resources to restore and protect threatened species and habitats. This has involved work with all regional, local and national governments and other relevant stakeholders. Peru has highlighted the value of biodiversity to citizens generally and local communities, helping them to overcome malnutrition and the importance of culturally appropriate alternatives to improve the household economy and nutrition. President, to ensure that all over the world we achieve this, we call for parties' commitments to be heightened so that effective nature-based solutions be found to see off the effects of climate change, to promote a One Health approach, and to reduce pressure on biodiversity, guaranteeing synergies between conventions to have a greater impact. The new global biodiversity framework after 2020 will be an opportunity and a demonstration of the commitment that we so dearly need to survive. Because we, after all, are part of nature. Thank you very much, President.
Thank you, Ambassador, for your statement. I was told by the Secretariat the Republic of Congo representative is not in room for the time being. I now give the floor to Thailand. I invite Secretary General of the Office of Natural Resources, Environmental Policy and Planning, Dr. Phedong Sayas, to be followed by Sri Lanka. Thailand, you have the floor.
在吗？把麦克风给
Microphone for Thailand, please.
有吗？
Is Thailand in the room? Please do not press the button on the microphone. The microphone will be turned on automatically by the technician. Is Thailand in the room, please? Well, we'll come back to Thailand. In order to save time, I will first of all give the floor to Sri Lanka. I give the floor to High Commissioner of Sri Lanka to Canada, Harsha Kumara Navaratane. Your Excellency, you have the floor. Microphone for Sri Lanka, please.
Hello. Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, I thank our best governments of Canada, Quebec, China for here in the beautiful historic city of Montreal. It is great pleasure for me to deliver this statement on behalf of the government of Sri Lanka, which is a biodiversity hotspot. Sri Lanka is endowed with a wide variety of ecosystem. It is one of the most biologically diverse countries in the Asian region. Despite its small size, Sri Lanka has varied climate and topography, which has resulted in a rich biodiversity in addition to having a high taxonomic diversity. Sri Lanka is also increasingly being subjected to high risk as reflected in the recently published National Red List. Out of 3,087 flora species, 1,496 are threatened. 863 endemic flora species were recorded, 522 species of avifauna were recorded, and 244 of them were assessed. Among them, 81 species are threatened. 97 freshwater fish species were assessed, out of which 61 species are endemic to Sri Lanka, whereas 51 species are threatened. Sri Lanka accepts the direct drivers of biodiversity loss are land, sea, use change, overexploitation, climate change, pollution, and invasive alien species which require regional level solution. Apart from those direct and common drivers of biodiversity loss, Sri Lanka being an island state, we are also uniquely and increasingly influenced by the transboundary air and marine pollution. This underscores the urgent need of having in place effective instrument and mechanism of safeguarding biodiversity of island nation like Sri Lanka. Such initiative may be voluntary commitments or legally binding instrument. In this regard, we would like to recognize Glow-Litter partnership to enhance regional cooperation to support transition of maritime transport and fisheries sector towards low plastic future. Also, we support the Regional Resource Center for Asia Pacific and AIT in their effort of revising the Malé Declaration on control of prevention of air pollution and its like transboundary effect for South Asia. Sri Lanka is always ready to stand with the international community for healthy and sustainable planet. We therefore spearheaded the UN Global Campaign on Sustainable Nitrogen Management in 2019. We also lead the Commonwealth countries as the champion of mangrove restoration. We supported the Kunming Declaration to accelerate the action towards achieving the 2050 vision of biodiversity. In terms of high-level political ambition, I would emphasize on the need to support sustainable coexistence of communities and ecosystem in terms of financial and capacity building intervention. Poverty and livelihood need are key social drivers negatively impacting biodiversity in developing countries such as Sri Lanka. We would like to support it by the including financial mechanism established under the convention. In conclusion, Sri Lanka support the upcoming post-2020 global biodiversity framework with more realistic and implementable targets, and we strengthen South-South, North-South, and a triangular cooperation in coming decade. Thank you.
I thank you for your statement. And now I give the floor to the representative of Thailand. After that, we will turn to the statements by the international organizations. I give the floor to Thailand.
Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, on behalf of the Royal Thai government, I wish to extend our appreciation to the Government of Canada under the presidency of the People's Republic of China for hosting the second part of CBD COP-15 in the wonderful city of Montreal. I strongly believe that the outcomes of this meeting, especially the adoption of the post-2020 GBF, will help spearhead us toward a more effective biodiversity conservation and its sustainable use. Thailand is convinced that the post-2020 GBF will help reverse biodiversity loss globally. We will incorporate the post-2020 GBF goals and targets into our FIP and BSAPs. Thailand would like to stress the importance of increasing resources mobilization, including financial support, technology transfer, as well as capacity building to ensure the successful implementation, especially for developing countries. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, the planetary emergency of biodiversity loss and climate change place our world and the well-being of humankind at great risk. Transformative changes and ambitious commitments in our way of doing businesses and living are therefore urgently needed. In this light, Thailand strives to move forward greener with a more balanced and resilient growth through a bio-circular green economy model. The BCG model capitalizes on the country's strengths in biodiversity and employs technology to transform Thailand into a value-based economy, while ensuring full engagement of private sector, civil society, and local community. We are accelerating the enactment of the National Biodiversity Act, which will develop synergized mechanisms for sustainable utilization and equitable benefit sharing of our biological resources. Distinguished delegates, Thailand firmly believes in nature-based solutions. This is also part of our inclusive efforts to mitigate the impacts of climate change. Thailand's 20-year national strategy, 2018 to 2037, has set the target of expanding green areas up to 55% of the country's total land areas. We also commit ourselves to the 30 by 30 target for protected areas with an emphasis on marine and coastal biodiversity. Mr. President, I would like to emphasize that the efforts to reverse biodiversity loss and conserve biodiversity while also ensuring sustainable economic growth cannot be carried out by one country alone. Partnerships at all levels are crucial. Thailand will definitely do our utmost to foster partnerships and to work closely with all parties and stakeholders to save our biodiversity and ensure a better world for us all. And more importantly, ladies and gentlemen, for the brighter future of the next generation. Thank you very much. Khop khun krap.
I thank you for your statement. I thank the representative of Thailand. Now we have some time reserved to listen to the views of international organizations. First of all, I would like to give the floor Ms. Valerie of the World Bank.
Chair. Et merci à la ville et aux citoyens.
Thank you to the city and citizens of Montreal for their welcome.
COP-15 is taking place amid unprecedented challenges that are putting decades of development gains at risk and disproportionately affecting the poorest people on our planet. The global loss of nature is central to many of these challenges. The COVID-19 pandemic, for example, has highlighted the health risks associated with nature loss, while causing the biggest increase in global poverty in decades. And the next pandemic is likely to emerge at the arc of deforestation. The current food crisis is expected to drive millions more into extreme poverty, with too many millions already on the brink of famine and their nature-based social safety net gone. This is why the World Bank Group considers nature a critical development issue to address poverty and inequality, to create economic opportunities, and to fight climate change. We see three strategic areas where transformational change is needed
to revert nature loss and attain impact at scale. The first, nature should be placed at the core of development efforts. We need to move beyond conservation and instead apply a whole-of-economy approach that puts nature into sector policies and into economic and financial decisions. Chair, this is what we are already doing at the World Bank Group, where eco-economic development is our new watchword. Second, nature and climate are linked and must be addressed in tandem. We now have an opportunity to realize the potential of nature-based solutions at scale. And third, we must shift from just financing green projects to financing green economies. We must defragment the public and private biodiversity finance architecture, and we must adjust the cost of capital to unlock financing at scale for biodiversity. Unprecedented crises, Chair, call for an unprecedented response. The World Bank Group, I'm happy to tell you, is rising to these challenges. We are a leading multilateral financier of nature and climate action, having directly invested $2.5 billion into nature in our last financial year. We provide data and analytics, technical assistance, and access to capital markets for countries, for corporates, and for communities who want to invest in nature-based solutions. The World Bank, the International Finance Corporation, and the Multilateral Insurance Guarantee Agency, together as the World Bank Group, are working to mobilize private finance for nature at scale to transform the way we build, the way we produce, and the way we consume. And once approved, we stand ready to support countries implement the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. We count on you, Excellencies, to deliver an ambitious framework that will help bend the curve of nature loss, and in so doing, build the green, resilient, and inclusive economies of tomorrow. Thank you.
I thank you for your statement, and I now give the floor to Mr. Suyong Zhou, Managing Director of the Directorate of Technical Cooperation of UNIDO. I give you the floor.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, it is an honor for me to address this landmark international forum. UNIDO is strongly committed to work with all of you towards the adoption and the implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. This is a crucial chance to sustain the web of life upon which humankind depends for food, water, health, climate regulation, and prosperity. The conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity are embedded in UNIDO's mandate to promote inclusive and sustainable industrial development. We support all member states to steer their industries on a path to sustainability as a means to ensure conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity, as well as restoration of natural ecosystems. Distinguished delegates, circular economy is one of the promising solutions to address the triple planetary crisis of climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution. UNIDO supports developing countries in a just transition to a circular, nature, and bio-based solution-oriented economy through the development of roadmaps and strategies, knowledge exchange, and capacity building, leveraging of technological and financial resources, all of which translates into concrete projects on the ground. Biodiversity protection is intertwined with climate change action. UNIDO's climate change mitigation adaptation portfolio incorporates numerous natural positive components. These include, among others, eco-industrial park solutions, circular agro-business interventions, nature-based infrastructure installations, and the valuation of ecosystem services. Inspired by the outcome of the recent international climate talks at COP-27, we aim to sharpen our focus on promoting community-based resilience building through integration of ecosystem-based adaptation, resulting in protection of threatened ecosystems. Excellencies, at the heart of UNIDO's activities lies harness of the power of multi-stakeholder partnerships and collaborations. This combination of partnership building, policy coordination, and on-the-ground action is UNIDO's contribution to the efforts of the global community to build a resilient, diverse, and inclusive world for the current and the future generations. Together, united, we can avoid the global crisis and put our economies, societies, and our planet on the path to healing and recovery. Thank you.
I thank you for your statement, and I now give the floor to the Deputy Executive Secretary, Mr. Carlos Martin Novella of the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Conventions. I give you the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, pollution is one of the key drivers of biodiversity loss, as has been recognized as such in the Aichi Biodiversity Target number 8 and in the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework Target 7 now under discussion, as well as in the coming declaration, along with abundant scientific publications. Preventing, controlling and managing pollution by hazardous chemicals and waste is central to improve health, human well-being and prosperity for all. Together, the Basel, Rotterdam and Stockholm Conventions embody a life cycle approach to the sound management of chemicals and waste and form an overarching international legal basis for global efforts to address the adverse impacts of hazardous chemicals and wastes. As such, their implementation contributes towards addressing the three planetary environmental crises of climate change, pollution and biodiversity loss, as well as supporting the implementation of the 2030 Agenda. The Stockholm Convention is the international legal instrument to eliminate the production and use of persistent organic pollutants threatening biodiversity. The Basel Convention provides the international legal basis to regulate the transboundary movement of waste threatening biodiversity, as well as the guidance instruments to ensure the sustainable management domestically. The Rotterdam Convention provides the legal framework that promotes shared responsibility and cooperative efforts in the international trade of hazardous chemicals. During the high-level segment of the 2021-22 meetings of the Conference of the Parties of the Basel, Rotterdam and Stockholm Convention, just last month of June, ministers stressed that the implementation of the Basel, Rotterdam and Stockholm Conventions plays a crucial role in the development of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework and in achieving the national commitments under the Paris Agreement as well. Addressing pollution, climate change and biodiversity loss in an integrated manner offers win-win opportunities, optimizing the use of limited resources and achieving multiplying and accelerated solutions. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the Secretariat of the Basel, Rotterdam and Stockholm Conventions stands ready to continue strengthening the collaborative efforts and synergies between the biodiversity and the chemicals and waste conventions to build a shared future for all life on Earth. As requested by the 2021 and 2022 BRS Conference of the Parties, the Secretariat will be preparing a report including possible recommendations on how the Basel, Rotterdam and Stockholm Conventions could contribute to the post-2020 biodiversity framework once it is adopted in the coming few days, for consideration by the Conference of the Parties of the Basel, Rotterdam and Stockholm Conventions at the forthcoming meeting in May 2023 in Geneva, Switzerland. Thank you very much for your attention.
I thank you for your statement. And now we will be hearing the last speaker in our afternoon meeting. I give the floor to the Executive Director of the ASEAN Center for Biodiversity, Ms. Teresa Mudita Lim. I give you the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or the ASEAN, Center for Biodiversity, or the ACB, underlines the important role of sub-regional and regional organizations, not only in shaping the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, but more importantly, in its implementation. Sub-regional organizations, especially those under very large and highly diverse regional groups, are in a unique position to contribute significantly in facilitating effective and concrete measures to meet global biodiversity targets. This is by supporting the efforts of similarly situated member states in accordance with their national priorities, circumstances, and capabilities, and maximizing available resources to do so. The ASEAN's contributions towards the achievement of global biodiversity targets are documented in the 3rd edition of the ASEAN Biodiversity Outlook. These accomplishments demonstrate the outcomes of collective and committed actions of the 10 ASEAN member states through the support of the ACB to coherent, science-based policy making, facilitating biodiversity data and knowledge sharing through the ASEAN Clearinghouse Mechanism and the ASEAN Biodiversity Dashboard, scaling up of conservation initiatives and resource mobilization mechanisms, delivering responsive capacity enhancement opportunities, raising awareness, and strengthening synergies among the CBD and other biodiversity-related multilateral environmental agreements. Nurturing partnerships enables the ACB to enhance the region's whole-of-community approach to mainstreaming biodiversity through inclusive cross-sectoral processes. These include building on the biodiversity and climate change nexus through the promotion of nature-based solutions and ecosystem-based approaches, addressing the interlinkages between health and biodiversity in line with our ASEAN Comprehensive Recovery Framework, and strengthening ecological connectivity, restoration, and resilience through our ASEAN Green Initiative and ASEAN Heritage Parks Program. Through our ASEAN Youth Biodiversity Program, young leaders are meaningfully engaged and supported to contribute to our collective goals. The ACB also facilitates partnerships between governments and the private sector in the region to mainstream biodiversity in businesses and industries. In pursuit of mainstreaming biodiversity in tourism, the ACB will be supporting the International Ecotourism Travel Mart from March to April 2023 in the Philippines as an effort to promote sustainable and nature-positive tourism. With the ASEAN's call for a realistic yet ambitious and transformative post-2020 global biodiversity framework, the ACB welcomes partnerships across sectors as it continues to assist and support the ASEAN member states in making considerable strides towards the 2050 vision of living in harmony with nature. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for your statement. Dear ministers and delegates, distinguished participants, although we still have a list of speakers remaining to take the floor, however, we do need to give our interpreters a break. So I'm compelled to pause the proceedings. This evening at 7:30, we shall reconvene. We'll start by giving Australia the floor, and we'll continue the list of speakers therefrom. I appeal once again to you to limit your statements to the time limit so we can hear as many speakers as possible. So I declare closed this plenary session of the high-level segment. I thank you.
Okay, the bell worked really well. Yeah, the bell.